Keith, do you have a flannel on? Oh, he's wearing a t-shirt, looks like. Yeah, so you're in good company. All right.
Did not get the memo either.
All right, good evening.
Recording in progress.
Today,
That's not a t-shirt.
do what?
I don't have a t-shirt on.
Oh, do you have a flannel on?
No.
Oh, we're all wearing flannels except for Chrissy, and we were trying to see if you had a flannel.
No, I had a flannel. I could have worn it.
Yeah. All right. Tonight is Monday, October 16th, 2023. This is Historic Preservation Commission, and we'll do a roll call, please.
Commissioner Anderson. Sorry.
Yes, here.
Commissioner Bogab.
Here. Yes.
Commissioner Dahlia.
Here.
Commissioner Berg.
Here.
Commissioner Dunlap.
Here.
Commissioner Keller.
Here.
Chair Haley.
Here. And our approval for our agenda this evening. If there's no changes, someone can move to approve.
Motion.
I'd like to add a request to do a brief recap of the request for conservation easement for 601 Lincoln, which had been before us in 2020 and is now before the City Council tomorrow. So maybe we could do a brief recap of that, because it was confusing at the time, if you recall.
I can give you an update at the end of the meeting. We can't have a discussion about it. So you can ask questions, but we can't discuss the actual property. Even though you've already ruled on it, just because it's still an open case.
No discussion? What do you mean? You can discuss where it's at, but
I can share with
can't
you,
bring it up?
yeah, exactly. I can share
there
with
was-
you what happened and then what it's happening tomorrow
Okay.
night.
It was controversial at the time.
Mm-hmm.
It came up really quickly. Well, I'm discussing it now, and I probably shouldn't do that.
Yeah.
So would I need to go to the city council tomorrow to bring that up?
So if you want to give any feedback as a commissioner or as a resident, then yes, council would be the
Okay.
best place to do that. We can also talk at the end of the meeting, you and I, Gary. Happy to discuss more, but I am more than happy to provide an update at the end, but it just
Yeah.
can't become an item for discussion.
It was before you were here and before everybody but Linda and me. So it was, it's tough to see it come up now. It's not that I disagree with it. It's just that the process wasn't very good.
So do you want to add,
Would you like an update tonight, or do you want to?
Yeah, we'll have an update, but I'll probably go to the council meeting tomorrow.
Okay.
Okay.
so we can add that to the
We'll do
agenda.
that to the items from staff, updates from commissioners. Okay. All right, anything else to add or change? If not, we can make a motion.
Motion to approve?
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
And are there any public comments that are not, of items that are not on our agenda tonight? And none in the, do we have any public on the online? All right. Then we have public hearings tonight. Our first one is 829 Lincoln, and we'll have a staff presentation.
Good evening, Chair and Commissioners. Let me get this going. Okay, so for 829 Lincoln Avenue, we have a landmark alteration certificate and a grant request. Just to get right into it, the conditions over time, so there's a photo from the 1920s on the left, and then a recent photo from this year on the right. Just to note, over time, the siding, the porch ornamentation has changed. The first floor window size and shape, which you can kind of clearly see here, both on the side elevations and also on the front elevation, have changed. And then also a number of the different materials on the outside have changed as well. So in terms of landmark criteria, just to give a summary, the age meets our 50 years or older criteria. The architectural significance, so there was previously folk Victorian ornamentation. Some remains, or rather the restoration project that's a part of this whole request would restore some of it. this folk Victorian ornamentation on what's effectively sort of a vernacular wood frame basic home. We've seen a number of these exact sort of configurations in Louisville, and they definitely relate to the social significance of, you know, longtime single-family ownership, mining connection, Italian history. A particular interest in this one is its relationship to prohibition and the saloon history as well, financing-wise for the city. And then in terms of physical integrity, the form remains with little or no change, except for the exterior elements that I noted previously. So the alteration certificate would affect the siding, the porch trim, and then the window design. So the porch restoration you can see in this photo, and I'll just toggle back quickly here to this picture. See, the idea is to bring it back almost completely to its original design. And then there's also a proposal to add a railing. So you can see there's an existing railing there. The applicant wants to add another railing for safety. The proposal here in this alteration certificate, in this design, shows sort of like a folk Victorian look, but the actual proposal is what's inset in the picture, just to differentiate the railing so it doesn't look like it's historic. There's also a request to update the window design. This would not be necessarily to the historic windows because the applicant doesn't want to change all of the shapes of the windows. They're interior changes. They kind of followed those, you know, from tall to sort of wider and shorter. And so she's not proposing to update them completely, but is proposing to add a new design to them and sort of upgrade them because they're sort of falling apart, sort of a later 20th century remodel. So then in terms of the grant criteria, all of the requested work is identified in the HSA. It all relates to historic preservation, restoration, or rehabilitation. In this case, rehabilitation for the window replacement, and then restoration of the front porch. And then this does meet our grant maximum of coming in under $40,000, so the total is $25,168.50. So with that, staff is recommending approval of all three resolutions. That would be Resolution 8 pertaining to the landmark, Resolution 9 pertaining to the alteration certificate, and Resolution 10 pertaining to the grant request. Happy to answer any questions that you have.
Thank you. Any questions for staff?
I'd have a question. Well, maybe it's better in the discussion that we have. Well, I was going to ask, the estimate of labor for work on that porch was $2,000, and the applicant said it was difficult to find somebody to do that, to take on a small project. I guess having looked at projects recently, $2,000 is very conservative. If it were to exceed that, is that easily doable with the grant request? If it came in at $4,000?
So if the total cost came in at greater than half, right? So she went over her grant request, she'd have to come back through a full hearing like this. Also, you do have it within your purview to change the grant amount. So sometimes you'll suggest something less, but you can also suggest something more. So if you come to a conclusion tonight that should adjust that amount or ask for another estimate between now and city council that, you know, more accurately captured what you think the labor cost would be, that's something that we could certainly talk about.
Well, some of the other requests we've seen ask for a contingency, knowing that it's likely to differ. And anyway, I thought this is very conservative.
Well, and if it came back at 4,000, then her matching would be 2,000, so then she'd still, but maybe I guess it's, yeah. It
Her
would just be,
request now
right,
is
I
for
get you.
2,050, and
Yeah.
that seems like
Low, yeah.
low. I recently got my deck refinished, and it was $3,500. You know. Anyway.
The 10% contingency is also something that the HPC has used in the past that you could consider adding, part of your recommendation.
Thanks.
Amelia, can you talk a little bit about what the commission has done historically for window replacement projects? Because I sort of look at this and say, if the porch wasn't there, and the windows are not historic. It's sort of a window upgrade program on an old home. And I get that it may fall within the guidelines of our grant program. I just wonder what historically we have done and how we feel about using the collective taxpayers' pool of money to pay for a window upgrade program.
Absolutely, that's a great question. So there are lots of different types of window work that has and has not been covered by the HPC. I think recently we've seen more that are actual window restoration projects. So taking either something that's historic and upgrading it, right, which would I think probably be a little more straightforward, or taking something that's not historic and turning it completely back to, say, what it looked like in the 1948 assessor's card. So those are two clear cases I think that the HPC has approved recently. In this case, this would fall under something that I believe the HPC has also approved in the past, but again, it doesn't mean you'd have to tonight. But it's a type of request where this is an older home that was updated, and I'm not remembering off the top of my head, but it's sometime between the 60s and the 80s. And that's something that happens on a lot of these homes that are about 100 or over 100 years old. And so it's because of the fact that they're older that they got sort of this, trying to use a generous word, but sort of a little bit of sketchy upgrades, and sort of that deteriorated or have deteriorated by this point. And so that's, I think, the logic there is that a new build or some type of more recent build wouldn't have the same restoration work that would be needed from a home that has been redone, even though this project specifically isn't a restoration project. So that's, I think, the argument that you could make, but of course it's up to you. And you could, of course, recommend to her that she get more money, ask for more money, and do a full restoration project, for example.
Yeah, I'd be interested in some of the other commissioners' thoughts, but if it actually were in conjunction with a more robust renovation to upgrade the facility, the house, the physical house, I probably would feel very differently about it. But it seems to fall within guidelines, but I'm just curious what other commissioners think about that.
Are there any images where we can back up to see the historic structure versus where it sits now?
Yes, let me switch over.
Sorry, with the 365 pages, I might be overwhelmed with what was in there. I think one of the things I notice from something like this and the 2023 versus the 1920s version is the proportions of the windows definitely are lacking, the kind of, I don't know, history that it had. And so I can understand where your comment came from. What we can say about that, I don't know, but it would be, if they were taller and the headers were higher, I think I would definitely feel better about something of that sort where it seems like it fit in, even if it was wider. Just the, again, proportions are concerning to me.
Amelia, can you remind us what the, maybe some of the architects here know, what the siding that's on there right now that was put on in the 50s, what material that is? It said in the packet, but I couldn't locate it again.
I don't remember, I had to look it up.
I know it was maybe concrete with asbestos or something like that. Yeah, okay. Okay. Well, because again, kind of just in the line of this, and maybe this is better for discussion, but that is not part of the work being asked for here, so that siding would remain. And I imagine that if window sizes were to shape, that would impact the siding, and siding would have to come off, things like that. So
There'd be other mitigation items that would come up. So I can understand that, and I don't really know where we are able to sit with everything, but I do understand the question being brought up, and I appreciate it being brought up, and I'm just voicing my opinion of what I see within the two.
Any other staff-specific questions?
No.
And I don't think the applicant is here, though we should check online.
The picture from 1948, the window size looks, or shape looks similar.
Similar to current, or it's similar to the original?
Seems, just offhand, that's a page 14, well, 47 of the whole packet. Anyway.
And I believe I recall that again, when we look at the 50-year criteria for landmarking, I remember that this packet noted, the siding, for example, and then maybe even the windows. If those were upgrades done, 47, 52 or so, I mean, they're within 50 years, which is what our criteria is for landmarking. However, this property, the work being done is bringing it back to the full Victorian. So you've kind of got competing eras there, if that makes sense.
So before we move to discussion, are there any public comments for this property? All right, so we'll bring it back for discussion with the commission.
I was hoping to ask the applicant a question regarding the guardrail on the front porch, and whether or not it was for aesthetics or code-related. It's hard to tell exactly how far above grade the porch is and whether or not a guardrail is required. If not, I would prefer not to see it. More like the original.
Yeah, I agree with that, but it is reversible, like easily reversible. So that's, could go either way for me.
I will say that at least for me, the material is, or the shape and profile is not of the same time frame, so you can obviously find that it's not from that same setup. Again, the windows and their proportion would be more of a concern to me than that.
So the other thing about the windows, I was thinking, because you bring up a good point as far as, what is our role in just replacing windows? And so if we were to pay to have these replaced, and then in the future, someone comes and says, like, we're gonna take it back to the original, like, shape and everything, it could be a little wasteful. Like, we wouldn't pay for it again, but potentially, I don't know. So I think there is some merit in, do we replace the windows when they're not going back to a period of significance, or do we have a period of significance, or do we say like the 50s when all these changes happened, if that's enough?
Is this,
Right, are we,
Yeah, I think that's the question for
That's the
me. Is this
question.
the new period of significance,
Right.
these current windows, or are these current windows, and I don't know the answer, when these windows were put in and changed the shape of the original windows?
I think the period of significance here is, when you look at the criteria for landmark designation, it is referencing that folk Victorian era, which is what the railings are being brought back to. So I think that is, correct me if I'm wrong, Amelia, but that's the period of significance.
But 50 years old for these windows?
Right, but
Correct.
the folk Victorian is more the
Oh.
original, the time the house was built, so 100 and,
Yeah.
100 and whatever years ago.
I understand they've been there for a significant amount of time, and it might be over the 50 years, but I would not say that would be the portion that I would pin it to.
Yeah.
And again, just because they're there, it's more of a ranch house style of the window and everything else, trying to get more bang for your buck on the width versus the proportion that's on the front of the facade. So what I see is the proportion of the rectangle that's up front versus the window and their relationship versus the other one that just seems like it is of a different period.
We have 3 different requests here. The landmarking, and then the alteration certificate and the grant request. And if we read the packet 3, it's written, it meets a lot of the criteria for landmarking. But my kind of just more of a question here, maybe I should have posed before, is if we were to not approve the alteration certificate and the grant request, and the railings and porch area were not brought back to this folk Victorian look, would it still meet that landmark designation with the other factors? Right, so like when we rule on these, right, we have to rule on them separately.
Right.
I'm not sure which order we have to go in.
Usually it's landmarking
Usually it's landmarking
right.
first. So but if landmarking, but then that would be without those railings, right? Because we're ruling on landmarking, not sure what's happening with that, if that makes sense.
Right, a landmark would be on the existing, like, right,
Exactly, the existing.
right.
So just something to think about as we, think about the order we have to rule in here. So if it's, right, if we were to rule that is landmark without this, we can move forward with these items, for the porch at least. But if we were to rule it's not landmarked, then we would still have to decide whether or not to move forward with these things and what to require, not to require.
One question I have is if we go in the order they're written in, landmark, alteration certificate, and grant request, I mean, it seems like they're all somewhat tied together, so are they able to, the applicant able to back out of any portion of the request if every piece wasn't met that they were looking for as well? Because I don't want to pin anybody into anything else.
Right, so once, if we were to landmark it tonight, it would still have, like, city council still sign off on it, and the applicant could pull the application at any point before that happens. Yeah, so,
For clarification.
right, so they have, they still have a choice even after our meeting tonight.
Just to Chrissy's point, or just so I can clarify it, if I understand it correctly, but is your point, if we would landmark this building, we might be limited to what we could do about the railing and the windows if we did that first? Or is your point, we would do the railings and the windows and then landmark it? Would it still be a landmarkable property because we've done the railings and the windows?
I think more, right, sort of more so, if we were to allow the windows to just kind of like a rehab, not a rehab, just kind of put in the windows that the applicant's asking for now, which are not restoration or not historic, which would keep the siding in place. But we were to then landmark it, we know that we'd agree then, I'm assuming, to the railing work. What does that mean? Like, does it fit the eligibility for landmarking in that case with the windows and siding like that? It has a lot of the other eligibility, but does it fit that eligibility? Because it is sort of competing eras. Like at first glance, it will have this folk Victorian railing, but other than that, it has other things like the location and the neighborhood, the complementary structures, and it's just an interesting one because it is sort of doing some work to bring it more historic and not other.
I just want to add, because I kind of went through this quickly, in case somebody missed it. The social significance also includes the fact that this has been, the owner is the same family that's owned it for over 75 years, who's bringing these requests forward as well. So just because I know that's been a talking point of HPC in the past.
I'd like to clarify maybe about the windows, because there are several eras here. The earliest windows look like there are two double-hung windows, but they're all kind of dark. The drawing proposed most currently is, again, two double-hung windows. And the middle period of the 50s and 60s is a single, what do they call it, picture window. Is that the way everybody sees that? So it is restoring it back to that original era. The big difference is the railing.
Well, it's not the
Posts
same
are even-
shape or size of the window. Then it's not the same shape or size, like the window opening has been changed?
Does
On
it
the-
like there?
So like the window style looks more historic, right, with the double hungs and the triple panes on the top. But I think what they're saying is this one was, like, these are more
This
long.
one,
Yeah,
this
the
one
new
is,
proposed
okay.
ones aren't
The
the
one
same.
on the porch looks the same. The ones on the extension to the right are definitely not the same. Yeah, that's true.
So it's a different size and shape of the opening. So that's what's kind of confusing is they've changed the shape to more of a 50s, like Chrissy said, picture window shape, but then they're putting double hung back into that same shape, which is just kind of historically confusing.
Yeah, it's hard to tell. From the architect's drawing here, I guess it's not quite as tall.
Right.
I think Gary's trying to say as well, though, that the one that's under the porch, like in the original photos, might be more the same size to the new one proposed. It's hard to tell because it's in shadows. So it might be just
This one right here
this one over here might be more
still
the,
looks pretty much pretty long, but yeah,
but
right.
The upper one, I guess, upper story is the same too.
the upper looks the same. Yeah, so that's good.
And I think staff said too, the changing the shape would kind of cause issues with the interior design. I think that was part of your presentation.
Right, so unfortunately, the applicant isn't here, so
Right.
I can't fully represent that part of it, right? But my understanding from my discussions with them, that's a piece of it, that the interior of the house, I don't know that it's a structural piece, but just sort of, she has designed it, they've designed it as, with the windows that have been in place for over 50 years.
Right.
And then the second piece of it is a cost element. Again, I don't have any direct information. She would be better to testify to it. But, I mean, my understanding from speaking to her a number of times is to restore the windows to original shape would trigger to restore the siding, would trigger a much larger project. She'd like to update the windows in some form from what they are today. And this is that proposal that doesn't trigger what would effectively be a much higher cost for her, even if the HBC did cover half of it, right? So again, it's tricky because I wish that she were here to represent as much as she could, but that's my understanding.
Yeah, the applicant did note that the windows are going to be wood windows, which is more historic, and have the style elements.
I believe they are a clad wood window, if I remember looking through this one. So at least they would have a little bit more of a longevity than a wood window on the exterior and the interior, which requires constant maintenance and binding and everything else.
So I guess we've obviously landmarked homes that have been changed with siding and window shape and that sort of thing before. So I think this goes back to your point is like, as this house exists today, would we think that this would be eligible for landmarking? Would be one of my first questions. And I personally would say, especially with the 75 years of ownership of the same family, like changing materials and styles through the decades is definitely part of Louisville's history. So I would say that it would be eligible based on age and the overall shape of the house, that kind of thing, has maintained its shape, his integrity. So I guess I don't see the siding and the window shape and size as making it ineligible, in my opinion. And then I think as far as the alteration certificate, I would almost be more inclined to ask, like, for the window, if we still have the siding that's more of the 50s or 60s, would we rather just have a window that reflects that period instead of that double hung? Like, I would almost lean more towards, like, not going back to the Victorian style with the windows. Would almost be my thought. I don't know. Because it just seems it just kind of adds like one more layer of confusion with, I don't know what to do about the porch either, but the windows, I just wonder if that would be a better solution. But architects might have better, does that make sense of just having the wide cement?
Well, I'll let you speak.
But
Could you just remind me again, do we need to look at all factors to landmark it? Does it need to
No,
meet
so-
each?
So each one's separate. I mean, I guess they could have a window alteration without being landmarked. So they could come back and say, we just want to I guess it would still come to us. Anyway, the landmarking is really the first thing before. Isn't that right, Amelia? Because they could still change the windows. If it's not landmarked, they could still change them if they wanted to.
Right, so you need to be thinking about landmarking it as it is.
Right.
And does it have that,
Right.
you know,
Standalone as it is today.
exactly. And then since it seems like the mixing and matching of historical styles is an issue, you know, that's something that you could take up separately after discussing whether this is a landmarkable property. Again, referencing the social significance, just a reminder that's a part of the piece too, the form, location, and all of that. And then certainly, I think the alteration certificate and the grant together are those
Right.
couple more naturally.
Right. So for tonight, the landmark would be kind of the priority and the first thing that we would want to get addressed. And then we would talk about the alteration certificate and if the applicant decides that they don't like our decision on the alteration and that affects their decision on the landmark, they could choose not to landmark and to do their own windows or whatever. Does that make sense? So there's still options, but I think landmarking would be the first thing that we would do, and then talk about the alteration certificate and grant requests separately.
I mean, and again, this is probably a question for you, Amelia, along that same lines. If it's landmarked and we choose not to provide a grant for the windows because it's a landmark property, can they change their windows?
No, but
If it's
she doesn't, so it's not a landmark until all the paperwork is signed, actually after council. So, because, right, if somebody is landmarking because they want a specific design and they want a specific grant amount, and council doesn't approve that, then they're not actually beholden to landmarking. They sign the paperwork afterwards. And also, you know, you could recommend approval of the landmark tonight and recommend denial of the alteration certificate and the grant and give specific feedback to myself and the applicant and come back with a new proposal on those pieces and hold the landmark application until it was a full package. That's another way that you could do it.
Okay.
So, speaking to the question about larger picture window versus the two double hungs that they have proposed, I actually feel like the two double hungs are starting to bring it back to closer to where it was before, because you can have this larger opening that is starting to proportionally be split into two and pulled vertically. It does appear, from what I can see from the original versus the newer one, is it's almost like the sill was moved, not necessarily the head, if you start to try to link up the headers for the doors and windows as you chase them around the house. I think also what, I guess, gets me a little bit is the shutters that were added afterwards. I think, again, widens it versus everything else. I think there's a couple moves there that have done this, it causes, I guess, illusion that's going on there. I can absolutely respect that somebody's been in this home for 75 years, and I would absolutely love to just help somebody out and remain and everything else. So I think that has to be considered largely in this decision. I don't know if it's our ability to say, the one that really gets me is the very front set of windows as far as the vertical element. And I'm not saying I wouldn't approve them otherwise, but I would also see if we could approve a 10% contingency or anything else of that sort to add to this whole setup to allow something to be, the siding to be cut a little bit and to get those back to a original proportion a little bit more. It doesn't, the ones under the porch are less significant in my mind just because they are hidden away. Plus, we're going to be putting railing across them. Just some thoughts. Again, I guess thinking out loud here.
So you're saying that the double hung wouldn't cause more confusion in your opinion?
I don't think so. I can't tell what the original ones necessarily were, but I would only assume that they probably were single hung or double hung, whatever. I mean, they're going to look the same.
So just going back to the landmarking as it is without any changes, how are people thinking about that?
Chair Haley,
as
could
far
I
as
just,
eligibility?
sorry, I think that Commissioner Beauchamp asked about the landmark criteria, how it functions. So I just wanted to bring that up.
Yeah,
If that's okay. So I have the code language, which I'm happy to read out, but effectively, the 50 years or older and the physical integrity are sort of separate, but it's only one or more for architectural and social. And so that means that you can find something to be socially significant but not architecturally significant. It still qualifies for landmarking under that section and vice versa as well. So just to put that out there as a reminder of kind of how the criteria work together.
Great, thank you.
You.
I think this property does meet many of the criteria for landmarking, the age, of course, the architectural significance in terms of the house itself, other than what we're looking at, like the windows, remains primarily intact, the shape of it, the style of it for that. That style is pretty common in Louisville, so it kind of fits with the neighborhood as well and kind of lends that like community feel in that neighborhood, which is one of the criteria. It's got the social history with the same family owning it for all these generations, continuing to own it, and it stayed in the same location. So if it does fit a lot of the landmarking criteria.
I feel like we've landmarked structures that were a lot less accurate to the originals than this. We may lose, we may not be able to specify it, but sometimes just a request to consider that window on the north, on the protruding part, be made to be more similar to the original window. That can have an effect. I've known times when the owner would make those changes, or the architect. Don't know, it's not, that wouldn't be very official, I guess.
Keith, do you have any thoughts on this as far as landmarking?
You look like you're muted still.
Okay. Can you guys hear me?
Yes, we can.
Yes, we can.
Sorry about that. So, yeah, I really don't have a problem with the change in the windows, because in my mind, it's you can rehabilitate it or restore it. And if it's a single pane window, like a lot of these older homes are, changing out the windows to make it more energy efficient would be more rehabilitation than it would be restoring it. So I think either one, and I don't have that architect eye like these other guys, so I can't speak to that. But I think the historical, social significance is important, and I would like to see this landmarked.
All right, thank you.
I'm supportive of landmarking.
Okay. So should we do separate votes for this, just to piece it out, or?
You have to anyway, so
Okay,
yes.
that's what I was thinking. Okay, so if someone wants to, if we feel like we've had enough discussion on the landmarking, we can make a motion.
I'd like to make a motion to landmark 829 Lincoln.
Second.
We'll do a roll call, please.
Commissioner Anderson,
Yes.
Commissioner Beauchamp,
Yes.
Commissioner Dahlia,
Yes.
Commissioner Berg,
Yes.
Commissioner Dunlap,
Yes.
Commissioner Keller,
Yes.
and Commissioner Haley. So
Yes.
Chair Haley, sorry.
Yes. All right, so then we'll move on to the alteration certificate and grant request. And these will kind of go hand in hand as far as, but we'll vote on them separate also, but we can kind of talk about them at the same time.
Just have a question. Just kind of thinking this through. If the applicant moves forward with landmarking and we just were to approve everything asked for here, is returning the porch back to the folk Victorian, doing the double hung windows, et cetera. This work was done. It's landmarked, and down the road, if somebody wanted to do an alteration certificate for the siding, that could be approved, right? Without grant money maybe, but a pure alteration certificate, like if somebody, because it's landmarked and it's harder to alter it, but that could go through in theory.
Yeah, if they wanted to, if they wanted to do restoration work and bring it back to the wooden siding, right?
Right. So just because we're, just kind of clarify this, because we're landmarking it as is right now, doesn't mean that's forever. So there still could be other alterations that would have to be approved by this board, of course, with higher standard, but.
I like Josh's idea about offering a recommendation and an additional allowance, or to maybe incentivize them to look at bringing the windows back if it works with their design.
I agree with that. Just to clarify, are you talking about just the front facade, street facing, or all the windows?
Primarily the front facade.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I would be supportive of just the front facade. I think that makes sense. I think it is a much bigger project to change all the window proportions. But I think that would be a useful incentive to, frankly, I could be far more supportive about the window program.
Agree.
Can we see the grant request again as far as, I think there were some other things besides just,
It's the windows and the and the porch.
okay, so it was just
Yep.
those, okay. Just making sure. Oh, yeah, okay.
Again, the maximum grant is $40,000, is under, this request is under the maximum, so there potentially is some wiggle room.
One question, and this came up in one of our future reviews this evening, is the new construction grant. What exactly does that cover? Would that be applicable for this project?
That would be like a new addition,
So it's a completely new, okay.
right, like a separate part of the house. So if we put a kind of a contingent, it wouldn't be a contingent, maybe more of allowance, like we would approve the grant and alteration certificate with a allowance, maybe up to the maximum grant for that, the additional cost of what it would take to take those front facade windows. Is that kind of what you're thinking?
Yeah.
What is the incremental amount then between those would be one of my questions. I could see up to a certain amount. I would guess you have additional cost of window, you have some cutting of siding, you have, again, shoring up, waterproofing, everything else. Like, there's some stuff with it, for sure. But
Right.
I'm pretty sure it's not changing a header, so therefore you're not digging into the bones. So I'm hopeful that it wouldn't be more than a max of, 3,500-ish.
Right.
I don't know. That seems accurate to anybody else, but
Yeah, I mean, I can't see it being significant. I don't know if we need to recommend an allowance all the way up to the maximum.
that's where I'm at. I
Right,
just
right.
I would probably put a cap on the allowance unless something else was brought back that,
Well, it'd probably
Swayed
have
us.
to be checked by staff, like it
Yep.
would have to be, like, not just a open, but like, to be reviewed, or
I would
even,
s-
would you just say a cap of 3,500 or something?
I would say up to 3,000 without further review by a member of the
Okay.
board or something of that
Sure.
sort.
Would we also want to include something like, somebody mentioned like the 10% contingency for labor costs that go up or fluctuate a bit too?
I would say that would be with that. Again, you should be able to run a skill saw and trim some siding and do a little framing from the outside, so.
And your comment was regarding his.
Yeah, what Gary mentioned,
As
yeah.
far as the porch costs for labor.
I would like to see something like that happen, this extra funding approved. I think this structure really does have a lot of other things going for it. And, you know, if we can incentivize the owner to maybe do some of this other work, then great, you know, so.
Yeah, I would say overall, we've probably kicked this one around quite a bit for what it is, and I would say I would move towards approving all of the
Right.
items as we said, but just allowing some modifications slight if they choose to
Right. Just that we support
look
it.
forward into that.
Yeah, I think our discussion isn't a matter of, I think it's more of just a wanting this property the best it can be. Like, it has so much potential. So I think that's the heart of our conversation. It's just making sure that the owner feels supported in doing more than the minimum.
Yep.
So, okay. Can anyone put all that together in a nice little package for our alteration certificate? Because this is just the alteration certificate. This is just saying that we approve the windows. And that we would prefer, I guess, that they would explore having a
Recommend,
larger.
yeah.
And then we'll throw the 3,500 unless approved by staff.
That would be in the grant
Into the
request
grant,
portion,
right.
so. I would move to bring forward approval of the alteration certificate with the caveat that they look at the front windows one more time. But I would approve regardless.
I'll second it.
And we'll do a roll call, please.
Commissioner Anderson,
Yes.
Commissioner Beaucamp,
Yes.
Commissioner Dahlia,
Yes.
Commissioner Berg,
Yes.
Commissioner Dunlap,
Yes.
Commissioner Keller,
Yes.
Chair Haley.
Yes. All right, and then for the grant request,
Sorry, I'm slow on the draw there before you
No.
voted. So what was just voted on was Commissioner Anderson saying would like to have them restored to the front window, restored to the size and shape and design of what was shown in the 20s photograph, but that the alteration certificate was approved as is if that wasn't feasible or the applicant didn't decide to do that. That's what I heard.
And I would further expand upon that if I might, and we can backtrack and have a revote if we need
Yeah.
to, or anything of
And
that
we're,
sort, because
we're
I
also
appreciate
in
where you're at.
slightly uncharted territory, so I just want to say for the record that I don't know how formal this will be. We may probably need to just bring a new alteration certificate forward, but I do want really clear, like, maybe there's a framing of the motion that's like, this is the direction that we would give, so that when we bring the alteration certificate, maybe to a subcommittee, it's really clear whether the applicant has met that or not.
The
I guess
direction,
another question I have is, do you feel like this is getting more complicated to where we should just have the applicant with us? Like, I mean,
So yeah, you could,
I don't
you
know
could
if-
continue this conversation and request more information from the applicant. That's also something that you could do.
I don't know what timeline or like all that kind of stuff on their side is, but it does feel like it's a lot of moving parts for them not being here.
I think that maybe the admittedly, again, you've made the motion. I don't know if there's a formal way to rescind the motion to the recording gods or the record gods or whatever, but
Right.
I would say, yes, maybe something along the lines of, let's continue these two items for a future discussion, and because that might give you the easiest way to say, continue to November, we're concerned with the windows, and I think the record will reflect what your concerns are. Maybe something like that. And then also addressing whether you're supportive of the porch. I think that you are, but just for the record.
Right. What do we think?
I didn't have any issues with the porch as it stood.
I think our only recommendation maybe was the one about the porch railing, to have that noted, that if the porch, not the railing, the handrail maybe was not code, to maybe consider not including it, because it's sort of counter to the historic look,
Correct.
but Again, whether we want the applicant here to discuss those things, or whether we want to move forward with the motion and kind of see how the applicant responds to that. I'm not sure.
It's messy.
It's
Yeah.
your choice, but I think at this point, maybe continuation would be helpful here for the alteration certificate and the grant request. Alternatively, you could deny them both, and then we could take it through a subcommittee with this clear direction. I don't think functionally either one matters, but I'm thinking on my feet here. I think a continuance is probably the cleanest one.
I would rather not deny and then try to go some other route. I'd rather, if anything, a continuance, just to expand upon my thoughts on everything, is the approval was as submitted with the caveat that we would look to either revert back to a original one or at least one with two double hungs that were more proportional with a lowered sill. Simplified.
Gotcha. Okay.
With a $3,000 allowance to help
Well, that would-
accommodate that project.
That would be the
That would be
next
the
For the
portion.
grant request.
Yeah.
So I would rather just approve it with that caveat or continue it. I do not want to deny it.
Right. Yeah. I think I would be in favor of continuing it. I guess too is that, I mean, is there any reason why the applicant wouldn't be able to be here in the future? Like, 'cause that's the other thing is if there's just a hardship for being at the meeting physically,
I'm not aware of anything.
okay.
Or if Amelia could discuss this with the applicant and get a different
more
proposal,
information.
maybe that would suffice.
Okay. So do we have to vote on having a continuance?
I would say we'd have to vote on rescinding the previous and then vote on the
Okay.
continuance is my guess.
Yes.
Okay.
So
And
I
then
would
continue the
move
next
to rescind the previous vote.
I'll second the motion.
Want to second it?
You haven't already seconded it?
Yeah.
You
Oh,
did.
did you second it? Okay. And we'll do another roll call, please.
Commissioner Anderson,
Yes.
Commissioner Beaucamp,
Yes.
Commissioner Dahlia,
Yes.
Commissioner Berg,
Yes.
Commissioner Dunlap,
Yes.
Commissioner Keller,
Yes.
Chair Haley.
Yes. All right. And then do we
Yeah.
need to vote to continue it, or can we just say?
Yep. I think you can probably continue both in the same
Okay.
motion if everybody agrees to that.
That's great. So we can do that for the alteration certificate and the grant request in one continuation vote.
I would move towards continuing both the alteration certificate and the grant request to the next session.
I'll second it.
And we'll do a roll call again, please.
Commissioner Anderson,
Yes.
Commissioner Beaucamp,
Yes.
Commissioner Dahlia,
Yes.
Commissioner Berg,
Yes.
Commissioner Dunlap,
Yes.
Commissioner Keller,
Yes.
Chair Haley.
Yes. All right. Should go a little quicker next time.
And can I just ask though and confirm that Amelia can provide the guidance to the applicant around the discussion of the allowance to change the front windows? So the continuance may be very quick to vote on next time.
You're asking me to relay what the commission would like to see.
Yeah,
Yes, I can do that.
okay.
Thank you.
All right, our next public hearing is 816 McKinley. And we'll have a staff presentation.
Okay, yes, 816 McKinley. This is a request for an alteration certificate and 2 grant requests for a landmark property, the Adkins House. So this, as I mentioned, has already been landmarked, and the alteration certificate includes basically 4 different parts of a project. One are changes to a porch, and then another is removal of dormer and addition of windows on the side elevation. So I went into detail in your staff report on all of these, so I won't go super into detail here, but the porch change, I would say, is a not full, but a 75%, just use a round number, restoration project to bring it back to the design and form, but to keep it enclosed to what was there previously, which you can see on the comparison of the drawing and the photo. And the removal of the dormer is exactly what that sounds like. There's a dormer on the side elevation. Removing it and replacing it with is a restoration project as well. Then we have an addition and a detached garage, which are nothing other than the restoration to affect the actual existing structure as it sits on the lot. And we have an attached addition And just to note, to get the detached garage piece sort of out of the way, because all property, like the whole property is landmarked, this is actually part of the alteration certificate process. So it is on the rear of the property, it's substantially different from historic, and so, staff pretty easily supports that request, but just, for the technicality of it, it does need to be included as part of the alteration certificate. So then in terms of this addition, we have all of this language about subordination, differentiation, and, staff finds that this addition, meets all of those. We're looking at what's functionally a 2-story home with a 1-story proposed addition. So that clearly subordinates it to the landmark, the historic part of the property. It's also very clearly differentiated in style, but it also has a few architectural elements that sort of make it more compatible. The pitch of the roof, and then sort of the width of the siding on the attached elements. So staff supports all 4 of these requests. And then in terms of the preservation restoration grant criteria, so because this is already a landmarked property and it's already spent out the amount of money that it originally was approved for, which was up to $5,000 at the time, it is no longer eligible for the up to $40,000 grant request, but it is eligible for requests as long as they meet extraordinary circumstances criteria. So everything that's under this request has to meet those criteria. All of the requested work is identified in the HSA. Staff finds that it all relates to preservation, restoration, or rehabilitation. And then in addition, in terms of the extraordinary circumstances, the foundation of the floor structure, the report describes this in more detail, but there's the absence of the sister wall and the extent of the structural support work staff finds would meet the extraordinary circumstances criteria of the condition. And then the roof structure, staff finds that 2nd-story living space and the work that's needed to be done up there, it's not very common in Louisville to have an older home of this size and to have a 2nd story that functions as a living space. So staff finds that means extraordinary circumstances. And then the other 2 elements relate to the restoration of architectural details that are currently missing on the property. And so those would relate to extraordinary circumstances that help to restore elements of the home. So the total recommendation and the total request is $58,750. Of course, that would be a matching grant. So staff recommends approval of Resolution 11, which would approve the alteration certificate, Resolution 12, which would approve the preservation and restoration grant. And then the final request was a request for a new construction grant. The staff recommends the approval of Resolution 13, which would deny the new construction grant on the technical grounds that a landmarked property that's been previously landmarked, previous to 2019, isn't actually eligible for those funds. So I'm happy to answer any questions about any of those requests if you have them. And also, of course, as you know, the applicant is here.
So one question I have is if there's a $40,000 matching funds that was approved after 2019 or whatever it was, if they've already dipped into some of the previous funds from when they landmarked, why could that not just be taken off of that total portion for the new construction and then allowed? I'm just curious. Does that all make sense?
Okay, so first of all, we're talking about the new construction grant?
New construction, yes.
Okay. So can I tell you why they're not eligible? Would that answer your question, or I think
Expand
I'm not?
upon it, possibly. It might answer it.
Absolutely. So the way that the resolution, so we're talking about Resolution 17, Series 2019, which governs all of the grant requests. The way that it's worded, it has a section that talks about all of the different, it summarizes all of the processes and all the amounts that any properties are eligible for. It has a section, a subsection, that says if you were previously landmarked and you're not eligible for for grants anymore, you can come in with a request under extraordinary circumstances. That's the only language, the only reference in the resolution. And so the idea there is that you can ask for extraordinary circumstances, but it doesn't make you eligible for any of the other grants. It doesn't, for example, make you eligible for the landmark bonus. If you didn't get a landmark bonus 15 years ago or 10 years ago, you don't get a landmark bonus now. So that's kind of the logic there, and I think the intent as well behind that is to sort of use new construction as something to get people in the door for landmarking, that type of grant.
Yep.
So that's the strict and then the intent.
It does make sense having the explanation of, let's say you have somebody else come in and they want to add on and increase the percentage more so to me than just saying there's a certain amount that would be subtracted out from your previous alteration. But I understand the letter of the law.
Right. I think certainly a potentially great conversation for revamping potentially at some point if that's of interest, but what they're coming in under now, they're not eligible for it.
Understood.
Right.
So the grant request is about 7.5% of the total project cost, which doesn't feel at all out of whack to me in terms of what a requested amount. My question is a little bit about the extraordinary circumstances, because it's the first time I've seen it, I think, on the commission. And is the foundation work for extraordinary circumstances a result of the project building a second story or expanding scope, or is it because we are attaching a new structure to an existing structure, and to do that, it's going to require additional foundation work?
Yes, that's a great question. So first of all, this project does not propose to add a second story. It's currently a two-story structure that has the livable space already above. And my understanding of the foundation work is that it's related to the historic foundation and that it's insufficient for even what's there today. So I don't know that it's literally not related at all to the addition, but I think it's very clearly related to keeping the historic portion of the house up and running, so to speak. In terms of what the relationship between the addition and the foundation work, it's a great question for the applicant as well. But you can ask him after you finish grilling me. Sorry.
I thought he was just going to jump right into the answer.
No, sorry. We have to keep some decorum here.
I have some questions as well. I think it was mentioned in the write-up that this was property that was separated from the 301 Spruce property broken into two lots, and yet previously this property in 2011 was given a grant, the original grant for preservation for painting. So how did that even work if it was all one property before and now it's two? And I also thought we didn't give grants for painting, but I could be totally wrong on that. Preservation grants.
So I don't know what they were giving out grants for in 2011.
Painting is what it says.
Painting was what it says.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I think in most instances that I can think of, painting wouldn't be covered now, but I really can't speak to what that 2011 grant covered.
You say you don't think it would be covered now, or?
We have not covered painting. If it were somehow related to preservation in some way, I wouldn't rule it out completely, but it's not been something that we directly support, right? Because it's not something that we regulate either. So that's one question. I'm not sure I know this. So I think it was a separate lot in 2011. I don't think it was part of 301 Spruce at the time. So I think that is a separate property. But maybe I'm
I
wrong.
thought that was mentioned in the packet.
I can review that and get back to you, maybe once the applicant's
I
making
think
their presentation, you
Maybe
might know.
Andy's ready to answer that, but. One thing too, with extraordinary circumstances, yes, we've had discussions over that, and it's not totally clear how we deal with it, but it gives us some leverage, some abilities. But it's really a legal term to say that what happened was not foreseeable, that it was beyond a party's control, that normal prudence and experience could not foresee, anticipate, or provide for. So if you had a tornado that came when you were having your county fair or something, that would be extraordinary circumstances, but something that you could have legitimately seen, in my mind, wouldn't be covered. That said, we have had the ability to see properties that we really want to save and use this clause to be able to do that, to add some money to it.
Yeah, Gary, where I was trying to go, or what I'm trying to tease out about extraordinary circumstances is if the program of the project created extraordinary circumstances, I might feel differently about it than if the condition of the existing property had extraordinary circumstances. And that's really how I was trying to
So let me
disconnect it in my mind.
clearly answer that. Yes, the condition of the foundation relates to the condition of the historic home.
That's
Yes.
really what I was looking for.
Yes, absolutely. And
That said, it has to do with when you would have noticed that, at least in the legal sense.
so I'm actually not familiar with what you're reading there, Commissioner Dunlap, and if
Well,
it's relevant
no,
here.
I'm not reading from our document.
Okay.
It's sort of like, everything goes back to Old English common law. The extraordinary circumstances is, well, you couldn't have seen this coming.
I'm not a lawyer, but I don't think that's relevant here. I think we're
Yeah,
using our criteria as we define it, so.
I think you're closer to force majeure than extraordinary circumstances.
And I think with historic homes too, the kind of unforeseeable is not having control over how your foundation was created in the first place. And so now you've had years and years of use. And so that's just part of the history of your home versus. Anyway, we can discuss that later.
Yeah, I would suggest hearing from the client or the project. And then,
Any other specific questions for staff? All right, so we'll have a staff presentation, I'm sorry, applicant presentation.
All right. Good evening. I'm Andy Johnson. I am a Louisville resident as well as business owner with DAJ Design. Wow, lots to talk about. So to start with, we kind of came to a little bit of a different conclusion on the previous agenda item. However, I think it's important for you guys to know the iteration of these homes is as much a part of the story as the original character of the home. And so, you know, the plaster cracks on the ceiling, the paint peels on the siding disintegrates, and then decisions get made to lower the ceiling to hide all the mess, put in mechanical, electrical, to modernize it. All of a sudden, the head height of the windows drop down, and then windows of that time frame that are in vogue go in, change the window openings. We get a whole different story of the home. The house gets wrapped in the magic material of asbestos, and voila, you've got a home that's going to be there for a very long time and unfortunately very expensive to change. We see this a lot in Louisville, and I think you guys had a really good discussion, and some of the important criteria around social history, particularly long-term ownerships, I think is a very relevant discussion. So thank you for that. It was interesting to hear where you guys came from on that. This home at 816 McKinley is actually quite different. It was originally part of 301 Spruce. And at some point, those two lots, pre-1940s, was subdivided. We believe that that was somewhere in the 30s. I don't have specific documentation for that, but we do have a lot of kind of peripheral information that we kind of sifted through. So also, we do differ with the social history a little bit, just to remind you of when we had this discussion for the HSA. We do not believe that it was a carriage house from the true sense of a carriage house. There are absolutely no indications that this was used for anything but human occupation and is kind of a guest house. So from what we call carriage homes now, I would say, yeah, it's a carriage home, but this always seemed like it was a home. And actually one that I think was well loved for a very long time. like 829 Lincoln went through its own iterations. So we'll dig in here. And I'll apologize for the delay in the slide presentation. For some reason, when we were putting this together, we ended up with a file size that was bigger than most of our 3D models. So anyway, bear with me on the time delay. So some existing photos. This shows this home. It had been kind of prepared for sale over actually a few sales of recent times, like within the last 6 years, and has been maintained to kind of preserve its street appearance. So it looks very together. And overall, it is, but there are a lot of things that kind of happened to this building that sort of will require a little bit of redo. I'll get into that in a little bit, but as you can see, we took pictures working around the structure. To the far right, you can see my cursor here. That's a studio. That's a second, that's an accessory structure in the northeast corner of the property. That apparently was used by one of the previous owners who ran a paint business, and that's where paint was mixed and stored, and this would have been, mid-century, somewhere in that time frame. The garage, the addition to the back of the property presumably was all done at a similar time frame. There's a lot of similarities in the masonry work, the construction, the siding, things that were very different from the original house, seem to have happened all around kind of that 40s time frame. Since we only have 1948 assessor records, like as our sort of marker in time for most of these homes, it's kind of hard to say exactly, but we're going to say 40s. And then you can see at some point the front porch was entirely enclosed. I'll explain why that happened as we move along. Actually, I'll explain it now. All right, so existing floor plan looks like this, and this is with the home as it is currently. This is our color diagram of how it changed over time. The red, which is the larger portion of the house, that is the main structure of the home. It's kind of in that T shape. The yellow was the front porch. It was open. And it's important to note that we believe that that was original to the home. It could have been added on, but more than likely it was original. And then we also believe that the green shaded area was pre-1948. It could have been added, it could have been original, but it was presumably some kind of porch that got converted. And then the color coding kind of goes from there with different iterations of this house and as how it was used. This is the assessor diagram helping to support some of our assumptions as well as what we can see visibly inside the building, predominantly from a kind of up, crawl space up perspective. And then a photo of the home, again, 1948, assessor record card, showing that open porch. Whether it had walls around it originally or if those were added is not a known factor. All right, so what are we proposing? This is a site plan showing the existing home as it is with its current footprint, and then looking at an addition that we are adding to the rear of the structure. I will get into the diagram of how we're approaching this with some of our 3D views so that it's a little bit more contextual, and we'll describe why we're making these decisions. We are planning to replace the garage. I know that's not really a historic component to be considered, but you can see the original footprint of the garage. It is actually quite small. It's very hard to get a car in there with the garage door as it is, and so we are enlarging the garage, however, keeping it sort of in that same flavor, and then we are going to be keeping that existing one-story studio intact. All right, so let's look at some elevations. So we did side-by-side comparisons, or in this case, kind of top and bottom comparisons, looking at existing west elevation. This is our front door elevation that faces McKinley. This is the existing condition with the front porch enclosed with vinyl windows, a different siding, a door that was from that period of time when they did it, to what we would like to see as a more open front porch, something that is a little more transparent, something that expresses the structure of that front porch a little bit more clearly. So comparing that to the photo of the existing home, and then looking at the door location. So I'm trying to provide direct correlations between our elevation and that historic photo, and then looking at bringing in what are basically infill windows. And this is a very common strategy that was done with open porches, that over time people would find that either the wind was a problem or they wanted to have a more enclosed front porch that was just maybe a better landing pad for coming in prior to actually going inside the house, just to have almost like what we would call like a mudroom. A comparison from a 3D view. So on the left, obviously, is the existing house as it is right now. On the right is our rendering showing the sketch of what we're intending to do with that front porch. So you can see that that window configuration wraps around the corner to the south side of the house and keeps that existing column exposed and basically infills what would have been an open porch with a glass enclosure. We did a study around Louisville. This does not take much walking around Louisville to find good examples. So this is, and keep in mind, I am not pointing out good homes, bad homes. This is just relevant to this discussion. So these are good examples of front porches that were originally open and then enclosed at some point, typically around mid-century. In some cases, like in the home in the lower right corner, that was actually done within 3 years of the completion of the home in the 30s. So it seems like that was sort of like a feature that got added later on. And you can tell by the glass, you can tell by the construction, whether it's a putty glazed glass or if it's actually like a window unit when it was added in. So these are all good examples just to sort of illustrate that this was a very common practice in Louisville, and adds a historic, adds a little bit of a flavor that was maybe a little more detail to that front porch. And then these are examples of front porches that were enclosed and maybe didn't express necessarily the original intent of that front porch. So this is probably a lesser important slide, but it does illustrate that it can be done to where it almost makes the home feel more like it was never having a front porch. Whereas in this case, we know it had a front porch, and we feel like it's really important to bring back the characteristics of that, and transparency is the way we feel we want to do that. Okay, so you'll have to bear with me. This is sort of like a reverse engineering of historic preservation. We're adding something that would have been done the way it was done a long time ago, not necessarily like how we would do it now, whereas maybe that an illustration of that would be that upper left slide where it would be kind of more incorporated with the home. We're trying to do something that would have enclosed that front porch in a similar method as it was done a long time ago. You may want to ask me questions about that, so I'll let you do that later. Okay, again, side-by-side comparisons. So this is all in the vein of the alteration certificate. So west elevation on the left side, top and bottom, existing on the top, proposed on the bottom. The east elevation, which is the rear, this is again showing existing on the top, new on the bottom. Keep in mind, the house, the taller portion of the house is existing or is the original house. The lower portion down here is that 1940s-ish addition. And you can tell through the foundation is a block foundation as opposed to a stone foundation that was reinforced with concrete in certain parts. Our new addition is a one-story addition, and when you look at the roof pitches and the volume of how we're expressing the new in relationship to the old, this volume, even though it is a very contemporary addition, actually has the same roof pitch. It has the same dimensions as this 40s addition, and I'll get into that a little bit with the plans. All right, again, still comparing elevations. This is a little bit longer elevation because we are adding on to the back of the home. So this part is filled with new addition, including the garage, just showing the context of kind of everything together. What you'll see is, if I can open up some photos here. Okay, we're doing two things to what was added to the house and trying to make some corrections to the home so that it is more consistent and compatible with a historically preserved home. Let's start with the bay window that is located right here on the south elevation. That was obviously added at a later date. We're thinking it's kind of an 80s addition is what we can tell from records and construction methods. We are proposing to remove that. We did a study of 1, 2, and 3 window replacements for that bay window. The one window seemed a bit anemic, and we also don't know what was there. We kind of presume that the bay window would have been maybe replacing something that was a little wider than just a single window. But a 3 window seemed a little bit less plausible in terms of the type of construction that would have happened in 1910. That's a pretty big opening. But a 2 window is something that we see all the time. And it seemed like that would have been plausible given that that was originally kind of a main living space, not a bedroom. So we chose a 2 window configuration as a replacement for that bay window. The other part of this is that there's this 1940s addition, which you can see in the existing photo here. It has small windows that are framed in between the framing members. And it has its own overhang. It has a different siding. It's set back a little bit. So there were a lot of things that they actually did to this addition that was actually pretty consistent with historic preservation methods. We feel like since it is an addition to the home, even though it does meet the 50-year criteria, that there's a compatibility component to this addition to the original house that we would like to actually bring into a stronger compatibility with our addition. So we're actually proposing to reclad the 1940s addition, eliminate the small windows and the kind of nuancical, strange complexities to it, and try to bring this into a more common vocabulary for the home. All in an effort to make sure that the original historic home is what stands out. That is our highest priority. And so you'll see from our images that that's what we're trying to achieve. So north elevation, very similar to the south, just on the other side, very few window fenestrations, and it is still all that one-story, very low addition to this kind of 1.5, 2-story home. Okay, back to the artist, back to our renderings. You can see the original home. You can see the addition in the back. And you can start to see those suggestions of a recladding of that 1940s addition going around to the northeast corner. So this would be a view looking from the studio, that CMU block studio, looking back at the house. So this is primarily looking at the addition of what we're adding to the back of the historic home, and really trying to let that historic home have its own very clear expression. This is a little bit closer up view of just the addition. This addition is largely formed around an outdoor area that is going to be an elevated deck that's on level with the main level floor. These are some of our image inspirations for that addition. So we are going for a very modern exterior, very clearly differentiated from the historic home. We are proposing to do a wood cladding on this, and to do it with the detailing that is very clean and simple at the top. So not a lot of metal coping, just really the wood ending at the top with just a very minimal kind of flashing. Large openings leading out to the deck, and very concentrated areas of windows. So these are some 3D renderings from our software, not nearly as pretty, but it starts to illustrate maybe a little bit more clearly from an aerial view what we're trying to do. So here's that direct relationship that we're trying to make with the 1940s edition with our new. And one of the things that we are doing that I think is kind of an interesting situation for this project, when we revolve this whole addition around the deck, we're able to basically have this very minimal connection point to the existing house. And so if we were to take it back to the original, we could. I think because we are altering the 1940s portion of the home, particularly with opening up with a large opening and changing the cladding and everything, it could be that that addition still stands by itself and it's still just an addition. But most importantly, I think what this illustrates is that that historic home is very much being the primary structure, and we're trying to further emphasize that with how we're addressing this addition. Floor plans showing we are planning on having a full basement below the new addition. Because the grade drops off so much, it is a little bit garden level, so the bedroom down here actually has quite a bit more light rather than just looking into a window well, and then all of the rest of this is on grade with the existing floor plan. So you can see that it kind of forms like this U-shaped area all facing inward to this deck. Lots of privacy in terms of its relationship to neighbors, but a lot of transparency within the project, just kind of unto itself. The goal is to allow the boundaries of these walls to expand outside, because this is a really small home. And we're trying to maintain kind of that cottagey feel of the home. That's really important to the owners. We're trying to create small spaces that feel just a little bit bigger, and we're doing it more horizontally rather than vertically with like vaulted ceilings. Upstairs, and there's that connection point to the floor plan. Upstairs, we're doing very minimal alterations. We are adding in a bathroom. There's only one bathroom in this home. It is on the main level, and these stairs are kind of tricky to go up and down. One of the reasons, actually, why that front porch was enclosed was to allow a better access point for those stairs to go up. So the front porch was enclosed. There was a stair that was brought out a little bit more gradually than what was probably a very steep, winding stair, possibly. And so this front area here was what was originally that front porch. So it was enclosed from a functional perspective to allow for access to that second floor. We're not sure how that second floor was used prior to that, but there are indications that it was used with a very old duct-fur flooring. So it may not have been originally used that way, but that attic was fit out a very long time ago. All right. All right, let's talk about budget, because this is probably where you're going to have the most questions. If you remember our discussion on 612 Jefferson, which was not that long ago, I want to say within the last year, we had an extraordinary circumstances discussion. And so I used a spreadsheet that was essentially the same format and was taking into account the same methodology to determine extraordinary circumstances. So just bear with me while I go through this, and hopefully it will answer some of those questions. Whether you agree with it or not, it at least explain the methodology. So on the left are all the qualifying things that we want to address with historic preservation. We do have a total project cost, just to be fully transparent on what the project is intended to be. And that's with the garage, that is with the addition, that is with interior improvements that don't necessarily qualify for historic preservation. So the first column to the right is our total budget of qualifying, historic preservation qualifying items. The next column after that is a fund request for what we see as typical items. And keep in mind, I'm only one applicant. I do have a lot of applications, and I have over the last 5 years. So we have a really nice amount of information in terms of drawing upon, like, what do we normally see for windows? What do we normally see we're doing to foundations? And these are in cases where we're not replacing an entire foundation, or we're not, doing crazy things. We're just kind of doing normal preservation things which sort of border on, maintenance in a lot of ways. And then the next column is what qualifies for extraordinary circumstances. Now, obviously, once we cross this line, this goes into our filter of what we think is extraordinary circumstances. And I went into a lot of detail in the application. I hope that you were able to review it. I tried to be very careful not to necessarily double dip. Like, for example, grading and drainage, we always have that. That is not an extraordinary circumstance. But if I were to go down the line, like the foundation, there are things about that foundation that we don't see in a lot of other homes. Now, we're not replacing the whole foundation, but we are going inside and doing a lot of work of reinforcing, sloughing soil, redoing the column, the sea of columns. That kind of work is labor intensive and usually more than what we typically get into with kind of interior structural work. One of the other bigger items is the front porch and the windows. So 2 items, sorry. We're really lucky in this case in that we have windows that we believe are largely original. There are a few replacements. However, they're all cable weighted and they actually work. We don't want to replace the windows with brand new windows. What we would really like to do is do a full rehabilitation. That is incredibly labor intensive, and we rarely have this opportunity in Louisville to do this. So that, and also to do a storm window over the top that matches the character of the windows so that we actually can have some component of energy efficiency with this addition or with this modification. Really a restoration, like a true restoration, not a replacement. And then the front porch and door, I've already gone into a lot of detail about that. That is a very unique situation. Basically, we feel this. This project was landmarked in 2011. We had a whole different program at that time. It was in its infancy, and we were kicking the tires. We had no idea how much money would get spent. We had no idea how much we would generate in terms of a healthy historic preservation fund. I think that this was a really great early historic preservation. You're right, painting is not supported anymore in terms of an item that gets funded. It does when you do siding rehabilitation, because you have to finish the full scope of that rehabilitation. But just painting a home, you know, we wouldn't support, as a town, wouldn't support, you know, a historic preservation grant application just so that they can paint
Yeah,
their home.
we did in 2011 for this.
But you did in 2011. However, it was a whole different commission, and it was a whole different program. We were just trying to get people to preserve their homes. So this is a cool home for so many reasons of its originality, of its history, of its social history, of the effort that the owners want to take to bring it back to that 1910 character, with that provision of they can't put an open porch back on this home functionally and make it like it would change everything about it. But they can do so much to really celebrate the originality of the home through all the things that we've talked about. So I feel like, I know we open Pandora's box when we talk about, you know, these kind of retroactive things, but I really feel like your ability to do this case by case and decide if it meets the criteria and the spirit and the intent of the program is unique. So I really encourage you to look at it from, I guess, a different perspective than kind of off the shelf. Let's talk a little bit about the new construction grant, then I swear to God I'll be done. The new construction grant was approved not that long ago. These two projects took advantage of that almost immediately. I think that was in 2020. And both of them were successful projects. 908 grant on a fairly large site, did a fairly substantial addition to the historic home, however, was well under the 10%, within 10% of the available floor area ratio. 1016 grant, same story. They could have developed more, they could have added more, but they were awarded a new construction grant because they didn't. I think that 816 follows that exact same intent to the T. They could be doing a much bigger addition. They could be filling up that site. It is kind of stunning how much they could be adding. However, they chose that home because they love the cottage character, because they wanted to maintain that, and because they wanted their addition to sort of match the small space nature of that existing building. And I think that even though the code reads a different way, it seems like this project meets that intent. Kind of like the way we do PUDs, we have waivers all the time, and our municipal code is written so in such a way that it requires it. I think that historic preservation, while in some cases could be interpreted to be very specific, I think it is also open-ended and leaves it up to you for discussion. So thank you. I know it was really long. I'll pause there and please feel free to ask me any questions.
All right, thank you. Questions for the applicant?
I had a couple. Yeah, I look back and those lots of 301 Spruce were, I guess, separated into this lot quite some time ago. But recently, there's been a new PUD for 301 Spruce. Is that related at all to your project here?
No,
Okay.
no, and it wasn't a PUD, it was a,
Rezoning or,
it was a subdivision.
okay.
If-
But
as far as I
unrelated to
understand.
this. And the other was, in the staff notes here, about why extraordinary circumstances, and I think Marty asked this after maybe having seen the same thing, that the foundation and floor structure part allows extraordinary circumstances because the work is needed to support 2 floors. Now, when I look at your drawings, I don't see that any original part is really supporting 2 floors that it wasn't before. Is that a difference? Is that a change? Or are you talking about the original house where it sort of did have an upper level?
Let me go to the floor plan, Gary.
Do you want to answer that, or because I wrote it, do you want me to answer it? Because you're talking about the staff report, right? Right,
your report.
Commissioner Dunlap? Yeah, so all I meant was that the scope of what would be required for the foundation was greater than what you would see on an average house, in part because it's supporting a 2-story structure.
But you were not saying it went from 1 story to 2 story?
I was not saying that.
Okay.
Does that answer your question?
Yeah, I guess. I think Marty mentioned something like it early on.
No,
Somebody did.
I did, but.
Okay.
What was the original request for the new construction grant?
What was the original request
Yeah,
from this applicant?
yeah.
The original request was to have a new construction grant granted. So I think I'm probably not understanding the question.
What was the amount requested?
Sorry, 15,000. Yep,
50,000.
15.
15.
Yep, the maximum amount, yep. I would just say on the new construction grant that if you want to consider something like that, we'll talk about how to do it. They don't qualify for new construction, but you do have the ability in general to grant grants, so we might have to sort of figure that out a little bit. But whatever you do, put it pretty specifically in the record, just because you've asked a couple questions about that one in particular. So I might jump in and ask for further clarification on what your deliberation is.
I think this right here, this image is the one that's going to be the hardest to sit and digest with everything. I mean, if we're over in the 3rd column in particular, and we're looking at floor structure, roof structure, siding, trim, soffit, those are the portions where it's really hard for me to see what's broken out into because you're attaching to it or to the existing structure or not, and I might just be misunderstanding stuff. So those would be the couple areas that I have a harder time with this portion.
So when we do grant requests for historic preservation, it does not interact with the new addition. This is only for the historic portion of the home.
Okay.
So this, and not only that, but it doesn't address the 1940s addition either.
The portion that you're going with the stucco or vertical siding or whatever.
Correct.
Yes.
Yeah, so the 1940s addition that currently is on the back of this home, that is not being addressed structurally. It is only the original kind of T structure of the home, T-shaped form of the home.
Would you be able to speak a little bit further to the floor structure, roof structure, and siding, trim, soffit, like where that does apply? Is it just, my assumption would be at interaction points from coming in with the new construction and where everything has to tie back in a termination point?
No, not really. So for example, siding, trim, soffit, this will be an entirely full scrape rehabilitation. There
Okay.
will be boards that'll have to be redone, only on that two-story structure.
Okay.
I mean, there may be interaction points of where that 1940s addition touches the historic home that has to be addressed, but you know, largely we're eliminating that 40s addition from this scope simply by recladding it in new. And so we're not adding or subtracting any more scope of work to the existing home because we're really not changing that much.
So it sounds like you're looking to re-side, re-roof, well, I guess re-roof, that wouldn't be enough to, maybe would, but siding, roof, and floor is really rehabilitation of existing stuff and replace.
That's it.
Okay.
Just the 1910 structure.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. That helps me understand that a little
And
better.
just, you know, for our office and the way we tend to interact with historic preservation projects is that we are specific around establishing a period of significance in time. And most of the time, it is that as original date as possible. So in this case, we're going for 1910.
And I would assume the siding would be the lower profile matching what was there.
Correct.
Yeah.
It would be an exact replica of it.
Okay.
Yeah.
In regards to the front porch and door, that part seems easier to separate out for me. I feel like the portion that's there right now doesn't really fit with the character of what was there or anything else, and I can absolutely appreciate that portion. So that's a little easier to digest on my end.
In addition to the bay window.
Yeah, the bay window is it really has no significance to me. It's on the side of the house. If it was an addition or it wasn't, it's still not a significant view that you're getting out of everything. And in regards to the windows proposed versus anything else that's there, I think the proposed windows probably fit in better with the character of the home than the bay windows do. Again, there's a certain proportion and scale and everything else that comes into play, and it's just a matter of eye for it. So whether or not it seems like it probably would have had one window before, but it has two now. Again, it's the side. I want more windows. Don't care. I respect the proportion.
And then for the floor structure, is that directly related to the foundation work at all, or what's the floor structure entail?
Well, let's just say that sometimes when you go in these homes, it gets a little wavy gravy on the inside. And so this is more about stabilizing the interior. The addition that was done and then the subsequent work that was done around the 1940s addition, they actually did a pretty good job in those newer portions, but they didn't seem to really get in and address the existing structure nearly as well. What's been hard is that we've had to go in and kind of peel back some of the energy improvements that they've done that covers up some of those areas, which was illuminating, but still tricky when those good measures happen, but cover up some of the existing work. There's a lot of really good information on the outside, but when you go inside that existing crawl space, you can see kind of the structural gymnastics that happened to stop squeaks, to add the stairs, and we're just kind of done iteratively, not intentionally.
Thank you.
Can I ask window restoration?
Sure.
What company, if you have one that you preferred and have a number from?
Yeah, so we've used, well, I was hoping you wouldn't ask me for the name. We used a company in Denver on a 1912 brick home in Wash Park, where we did full restoration of the windows. We actually used two contractors. The painter is John Travis, a longtime Boulder County painter who does a lot of restoration work. He did all the interior and kind of stripping, and then we used a window company to do the replacement parts as well as the newly fabricated storm windows that match the existing. So if you're curious, I'd be happy to share the info.
I just, a little bit of curiosity, and another portion is, I assume that if you are looking for rehabilitation of windows, that existing panes would be saved when they can,
Oh, yeah,
with the
definitely.
waviness and everything else, and then, obviously, the storm window is where you get your secondary benefit from, which I can appreciate.
One thing to add, we are working with Cara Sash and Door up in Windsor to do the infill windows. They do a lot of historic preservation work, a lot of old schools, old kind of larger buildings, but they do a great job of doing exact historic replicas of window profiles and kind of putty glazed details. They will also be doing the 809 main windows in that same flavor. So it'll be similar, just a little bit lacier profile for this project as opposed to 809 main.
I'd like to just mention that I appreciate your approach to your design with the minimal attachment. The interior courtyard deck separation really helps the original structure stand out. And as you pointed out, the front porch being enclosed, I always do like to see those porches open back up, but I understand in this case, seeing the floor plan, that it really isn't an option, and to do it the correct way as you're proposing, it's well done. I can say I am struggling with the grant request for extraordinary circumstance, and we can talk about that further as a staff, just to get a good understanding about what really is extraordinary. I feel like these older homes, there are going to be foundation issues and needing to have windows replaced and siding replaced, and at what point is that extraordinary? So we can talk about that further, but overall, well done.
All right, we'll make sure that Commissioner Keller doesn't have any comments or questions for the applicant.
Clerk?
We have him again.
I'm sorry, did you guys hear me? I don't have any questions.
Okay, that's great. I just want to make sure.
Thank you for checking on me.
Sure. All right, thank you. And then any comments from the public on this property? All right, we'll bring it back for discussion.
So, yeah, I'd really like to discuss this extraordinary circumstance. And being new to the board this year, if some of you that have been here longer could shed some light on what you have considered as extraordinary. It just seems that these homes, historic homes, 100 years old, there's going to be foundation issues. There are going to be structural issues, but what makes it extraordinary that we would then allow for those extra grants?
And I think one of the key points for this property too is that they were landmarked before we had the extent of our grant program too. So really the only way for them to access grant money would be to claim extraordinary circumstances. So we have had some properties that have, like, where they have to lift the house and redo a foundation. Like, that's more of where you can kind of say, like, that's extraordinary. Like, that's a major project that most houses in Louisville don't have. And so this, I think what you're saying is this doesn't feel like that to you, right? It's not, it seems
Right.
more of just like things that would be ordinary,
Exactly.
right? And so, so I think one of the things we have to balance is that they didn't have access to the program as far as our grant amounts, but they were one of the first to, or one of the earlier ones to landmark and get the original $5,000 that they could have. So, so I think in my mind, in a lot of ways, this is an example of a house that kind of did the right thing, landmarked when they early on, and now they're saying like we want to, like there are projects that we want to do, and could we still be eligible for it? And so claiming extraordinary, because the amount isn't much over what we would normally do as our,
Right.
you know, like the, what, like $18-ish thousand above would not be much more than what we would do in a normal, most of our grants do that. So I think that is kind of what we as a commission are talking about tonight, is this a project that we would afford extraordinary circumstances, kind of because they didn't have access to it back in the day. But there are times, and that's what I think Gary would probably talk about a lot. When he first started, we had a lot of extraordinary circumstances where they were big, extraordinary things. So it feels very different. So anyone else can say anything about that they'd like, but that's kind of.
So to Gary's point earlier, it may not meet the definition of extraordinary, but we can use it if we see a project that we want to save or help.
Right. So so that's the beauty of extraordinary circumstances and not giving a super strong definition, is that we have this flexibility to find projects that would otherwise not be eligible, and we can say we can use this for this example. But it can also get hard in other cases when we're trying to figure out, well, when it's way over the asking and all of that, like how do we flesh that out as far as what the amount is and what's extraordinary. So.
Okay.
Chair Haley, would you entertain my showing the actual text, just to remind everybody? Because it doesn't include what Commissioner Dunlap stated earlier, so I just want to bring it up. If that's okay for reference?
Oh, you're asking me if that's okay?
Yeah.
Yes, absolutely.
Sorry, I don't mean to interrupt, but just
No, that's great.
for reference.
Yes, thank you. I thought you were asking me to do it, and I was like, I don't know how to do that.
No.
But yeah.
Okay, so it's this section here, so just to orient you all. Section 12, this is the one I was describing earlier. It sort of summarizes all of the grants and then gives the process. And then it says, in subsection C, these grant limitations described above may be exceeded upon recommendation of the commission and approval by city council upon a showing of extraordinary circumstances related to building size, condition, architectural details, or other unique condition compared to similar Louisville properties. And goes on to say that those will be matching. That's the only language we have that we're working with here. There's no other reference to anything else. Thank you.
I wonder if this property as well, one thing that makes it different from other projects, whether extraordinary or not, is kind of what we're debating, is that it sounds like a good deal of rehabilitation going on of existing materials. You know, if you look at this in comparison, for example, to the one we just looked at 829, where they're putting in historic-looking windows, and they're making the choice not to use vinyl but wood, so it looks more historic. These are refurbishing or rehabilitating the original windows. They're bringing back original siding on three sides, and that's 2 stories. So there's a good deal of rehabilitation, which I imagine, you know, is much more expensive. It's more probably laborious work to make sure it's done right, to not, you know, hurt materials. So that could be something else to at least think about when we consider whether or not it's extraordinary.
I would say the windows would come under some other item like that where you could see the circumstances definitely there. I would say that it would usually be my preference to restore and put storm windows on if somebody's willing to, because there is a certain element that they can be more energy efficient, but they're not always quite as much necessarily. It's debatable each way, but it does keep the character of the house, and it does take some added expense, and they do take them out, they recondition them, they put them back in, so there's a process to it. I think this is what I was getting at the first portion when I was asking Amelia, just about, what our previous setup was prior to 2019, and would we be able to subtract something out and say there was a certain amount of funds there? Because again, I wonder if it's somewhat punitive, like it's this other thing where you did it early, you landmarked early, and then there's almost a certain punishment for it when everything changed and did come up with the times and the style. And so I think it's a good thing to discuss here, at least here right now. And again, I'm new to this board, so I'm just kind of deferring to others on this setup and just speaking out loud a little bit on my opinion on that one. And I would like to see people landmark and do something of this sort where I could care less. I actually think it's beneficial to look of a different time, if it's modern or whatever else. And it's dark versus white or whatever it is, to contrast what was there. And I thought it was well done and tastefully done. But it's nice to encourage people to have that ability to contrast and allow the original structure to kind of stand alone and shine, and I can appreciate that. And I think there has to be a certain level of consideration for a reward of somebody taking that step, and I think it's an important step. That's my opinion.
Yeah, and I would agree with that. I think the new addition, which the alteration certificate asks for, is thoughtful in those regards in terms of differentiating itself quite a bit from the original and keeping the one level look and the land, the square foot of the property, keeping it more moderate use. Those are all things that we have written into our program to try to incentivize people to do those things. It's nice to see that those are happening with the new addition.
Yeah, I was just going to say, I think, if you take a step back, absent a construction audit of all those line items, we're not ever going to satisfy nickel, dimes, and quarters on how much is extraordinary and how much is not. So I sort of look at this as, is Louisville trying to drive the right kind of behavior of its property owners and its architectural community, frankly, trying to push the right kind of preservation? And as I look at this project, the amount of preservation and restoration that went into it and that is anticipated for it, I'm delighted to see that. And, as I look at staff's recommendations about the new construction grant that's denied because it doesn't fit in, I'm okay with that too. Because as I look at the grant amount especially against the backdrop of the entire project, it seems like the right kind of incentive to keep owners interested in preservation in Louisville, which is ultimately what we're trying to do. So I think it's well done and a well done presentation.
Yeah, I think it's a very sensitive proposal, very much in keeping with the property and the neighborhood. I think it's a good proposal. I agree with the staff recommendation on the new construction grant. It's not much that was asked for, but the fact that it wasn't eligible when it was the first grant or the landmarking happened, and that there are no extraordinary circumstances sort of by definition on the new construction. So I guess I have to agree technically that the new construction request doesn't fit as much. But the main alteration certificate and the grant for that looks pretty healthy.
Yeah, with that said, I would still, as Amelia pointed out, I would be in favor of trying to discuss amending our code to allow previously landmarked projects to use that new construction grant. And specifically with this project, if we can word it correctly, account for a waiver to try and allow that grant.
So just point of order, so making a note of that, the interest in this conceptually for previously landmarked homes. To clarify what I meant before, you would have to make a finding based on the language in the resolution that you thought it qualified for new construction grants. If you wanted to give a separate type of grant or go through the general language of the code, you'd have to come back and formulate something separate, and I'm not actually sure what that would look like. But tonight, the only thing you can do is base it on that criteria, especially because that's all we actually have to work with. So just to clarify that point.
And I guess if for some reason we decided to rehash that, the applicant could potentially come back if we make those changes and address that separately, if that makes sense.
Post-construction?
I don't know. Yeah, I mean, it depends on how, I guess that would be depending on how quickly, like, is it an urgent thing that we're like, oh, we want this, like, taken care of pretty quickly? Or is this like a, oh, yeah, we should get to that at some point? I mean, that's kind of up to us too, so.
Okay.
Yeah. I don't have an answer for it, but that's. I just lost my train of thought.
So what is everyone else's opinion of the extraordinary circumstances? I mean, can we use extraordinary circumstance for this project because they landmarked it 10 years ago, and to Josh's point, this is now a penalty that, you know, they're not able to use the grants at this point? So can we say it's extraordinary circumstance that it was landmarked?
And I don't see
12 years
anything
ago.
in the writing of the extraordinary circumstances, the text there that prohibits that. So, you know, and just kind of in a related note, kind of looking at the cost breakdown that was shown, the line items, and kind of looking at my screen that's showing that too in a different way. You know, the front porch and door, that's a big cost. That's $40,000. We're thinking about, you know, here what we're discussing is applying extraordinary circumstances to allow more money to go here. You know, and I think, kind of like you, Marty, you know, ideally you'd open up that porch, but given other work that's been done, that's not feasible. And I think what's being proposed is second best. Like, that's a really good look for this home, in my opinion. You know, and it really was helpful actually to see the ones that were done other ways that aren't as good looks, you know, kind of hide or, you know, don't allow you to really see how the home was really built. So that's an expensive line item, but I think that serves a good purpose. So, you know, then obviously there's all the other line items together, but if that's kind of one reason we're trying to see if this fits extraordinary circumstances is to kind of promote the different things that we think make this house a good candidate, you know, it's already landmarked, but to like really have this look that adds to that community, that neighborhood, and Louisville overall, like, you know, I think that's where we're trying to go with this.
And I think if previously, let's say this house did have access to the funds and they had already pulled out their 40,000 or whatever it was, like, these would not look like extraordinary circumstances that I would approve because they already spent their money.
Yeah.
But I think the fact that they didn't have access to it, these are like absolutely going to increase the value of our home as a landmark for Louisville.
Yeah.
So, so I see that as, again, not extraordinary as far as scale, but more of extraordinary of
Situation.
Yeah, right, situational, and we absolutely want to incentivize our landmarked homeowners that we value their property and that we are investing in it, and we are thankful that they did it back before there was a lot of money. Not that there's a ton of money now, but way less money that they had access to. So, right, so it's just it's very subjective as far as how we define extraordinary, but I think it's very powerful in these situations where we can give them access to the funds that they didn't have previously. So,
Yeah,
Can-
and I
can
think to your question specifically, I mean, I kind of view this as a discretionary call of this committee using extraordinary circumstances to accomplish the same means we might have accomplished had some of the rules we have not applied today. And I think if you step back and look at it, and so that's going to create problems in the future when an applicant is going to say, well, this was an extraordinary circumstance, why isn't this? We recognize that's what discretion and subjectivity are going to cause us, but I think that's our role here.
So when we were considering this before, and looking at the numbers and everything else, there's a certain amount, the $40,000 or whatever else that can be applied for. And then what I was trying to say at the opening portion was like, I think that even if they had landmarked prior to that, that door should be somewhat open to be able to hit that same amount. Now, whether or not it is, and that's the discretionary portion, that's fine. But then when looking at this, and unless I'm looking at it wrong, if there was $5,000 awarded prior, we have 34,700 now. That's at that 40,000 point. So the extraordinary circumstances being asked for here is an additional $58,000, which is a large portion, above and beyond everything, right? Is that not how I'm understanding this one?
because wouldn't it be the 40, so it'd be 34,000, and then be the difference between that and the 58?
So,
That would
so
be
the 40 would be
extraordinary.
the total we'd be able to put into it, is what you're saying?
Well, that's if they were to, if they had landmarked in 2020, that would be the amount that they would have
Okay.
gotten, right? And so then that additional between 34 and 58 would be the difference of extraordinary that we would be allowing them. Is that what you're saying?
I'm just saying.
And then, of course, they also, yeah, because the 5,000 would come off the,
I'm just saying the 34,700 is being requested now, so that's putting right at the $40,000 threshold at that point. That's without
Right.
the last column on the far end.
that would be if they were requesting what we give a typical
Typical.
landmark today.
Yeah.
Right, exactly.
Which I could see that after that, it gets harder
To
on
go
my,
above
on my
that.
side. Yeah.
Right. Well, and I guess then it would be a matter of, so if this house came to us today, would these extraordinary circumstances go above that 40,000? Would we think that those were reasonable?
And that's where I find that you find items that are in that first column.
That you
know,
wouldn't agree with.
The windows
Mm-hmm.
or something of that sort where you're like, okay, I can throw that bone in there, but I don't see the whole thing.
Okay. So basically, that would be saying that the 40,000 cap, you would say, would be what we would,
That's where I would,
the extraordinary circumstance would say, we're giving you like access to your allotted 40,000 that we give all of our landmarked properties.
that would be trying to equal it out with what today's
Sure.
setup is, which I think would only be fair. But again, I'm new to the
In
process.
addition to that would be the $15,000 new construction grant.
No.
No, that would
We're
be-
not really discussing that as far as the grant at all tonight,
Okay.
right? So that would be a completely separate, because it's not in the code as of now. Right, so that's another discussion for sure is do we think it would be extraordinary to say, sure, you can have access to it, but we're gonna cap it at 40,000. So that's the piece that's been brought up for discussion.
And again, on my side, I would lean towards the senior members of the board to give a little bit of direction because you've been through this whole portion.
Sure.
So just to net the math, though, Josh, it's 40 versus 58. So 18,000 is the difference we're talking about.
Am I not reading this correctly, that 34 and 58 are being asked in total to be added together?
I think the total recommended and requested is 58.7, right?
Correct, yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's where I was getting
Yeah,
a little,
yeah,
that's
so
where
I
I was
think-
getting a little
I
caught
think-
up.
I think that-
That's where I was like,
Yeah, I wanted to net the math and make
Alright.
sure we're all on the same page.
So 4,900 had previously been granted.
Right, so they did have the previous owner who landmarked. Is this the same owner? No, this is a new owner from who landmarked, but they received the 5,000 for, or
It's still
49
attached to
for
the
painting
property.
or whatever, right. Sorry about that.
thank you for the clarification. 'Cause
Yeah,
that's where I
that's
was
good.
really getting
Yeah,
hung
yeah,
up.
yeah. So the total amount is the 58,000.
Thank you.
So does that change anything for you?
Makes it more palatable.
Okay. Yeah, I can imagine. Okay.
So do we, we have two proposals here. We've got the alteration certificate and then the grant request. Should we kind of back this up a little bit and talk about the alteration certificate, just kind of move forward with one thing?
Right. So for the alteration certificate specifically, that would be the actual porch changes, taking out the bay window, basically,
Reskinning the exterior.
right, and then the 40s section, just kind of designing that to be different from the original. So those are the alterations. Did I miss any of them? What you-
Correct.
I'm supportive.
I am too.
I would move that we.
Sorry to interrupt,
Oh,
just
that's okay.
to clarify, so the alteration would also include the extended addition and the
Addition.
detached garage. It
That's
includes
something
everything
major that
that's
we
shown on
missed.
those plans.
Yep.
Okay, I
Thank you,
apologize.
thank you. That was what I was
I'm
asking
still
for when I
supportive.
said didn't miss anything.
I would move that we approve the alteration certificate for 816 McKinley.
I would second that.
We'll do a roll call, please.
Commissioner Anderson,
Yes.
Commissioner Beaucamp,
Yes.
Commissioner Dahlia,
Yes,
Commissioner Berg,
Yes.
Commissioner Dunlap,
Yes.
Commissioner Keller. Oh, we can't hear him.
We can't hear him if we're getting you. Hold on.
Well, try again. Commissioner Keller
Yes.
and Chair Haley.
Yes. All right, and so now we'll discuss and see if we can come to a conclusion on the grant request.
may be so bold and move that we approve the preservation restoration grant request of 58,000 and change.
750.
750, she said.
750.
I'll second the motion.
We'll do a roll call, please.
Commissioner Anderson,
Yes.
Commissioner Beaucamp, Commissioner Dahlia,
Yes,
Commissioner Berg,
Yes.
Commissioner Dunlap,
Yes.
Commissioner Keller,
Yes.
and Chair Haley.
Yes. Thank you for that. All right. Oh, yes, one more. And the final one is a motion to approve denying? Is that what we're asking for?
a motion not to approve the new construction grant,
No.
right?
Is that how it was worded? I think it was.
That'll capture it.
Okay. that's
Yes,
good.
you're approving the resolution, which is to deny.
Oh, okay, perfect.
Motion to deny.
I approve the,
I second.
I second. Okay, second, sorry, I got lost there for a minute. I second the motion to deny the new construction grant for 816 McKinley.
We'll do a roll call, please.
Commissioner Anderson,
Yes?
No.
Commissioner Beaucamp,
Yes.
Commissioner Dahlia,
Yes,
Commissioner Berg,
Yes.
Commissioner Dunlap,
Yes.
Commissioner Keller,
Yes.
Chair Haley.
Yes. So it sounds like that's something that we want to talk about
Yes.
in a quick meeting, like maybe November. So we'll do that in our staff, our updates from commission members. All right, and then our, thank you.
Thank you.
And we look forward to seeing what happens, so.
Yeah, thanks very much.
Our next public hearing is 10:45 front, and we'll have a staff presentation.
Okay, so PowerPoint's restarting. Okay, 1045 Front Street. This is a request for a landmark alteration certificate and grant request. So I will make this brief. Please ask me questions if you need any clarifying information. You can see some changes over time, largely the addition of a covered porch, siding, and to the windows. And then there's an addition off to the west side. It meets the criteria for age, also meets the criteria for architectural significance, and that it's a vernacular wood frame home, but it speaks to the early 20th century mining and immigrant history of the city. Social significance, this is a long-time women-owned property, which is sort of unique or rare in the city, and then also has multi-generational home ownership and occupancy. And then is also connected to the mining history and Italian immigrant history of Louisville. The form remains with little to no change, just those exterior alterations that I mentioned. So in terms of the alteration certificate request, the alteration covers restoration of the siding, window restoration, both of which are supported by historic documentation. And then a request to differentiate the 1990s edition, so that's the edition that I mentioned on the, I think I'm thinking of that right, the west side of the property, but sort of the rear of the property, to differentiate it so that it looks different than the rest of the home that's being restored. We're also proposing to rebuild the porch as it exists currently, just to sort of fix it up to what it's current, sorry guys, the current state that it's in. Okay, so grant criteria. The requested work, and I'm happy to go through this in more detail, just given the conversations that we've had so far, if you'd like, but all of it, staff looks through each one of these and checks, are they in the historic structure assessments, and do they relate to either preservation, restoration, or rehabilitation, preservation of the home as it exists, restoration back to a previous time, and then rehabilitation, updating it so that it's livable or it's functional for a different use, right? So we've done all of that analysis and found that all of the requests are found in the HSA and do relate to preservation, restoration, or rehabilitation. However, the total grant request from the applicant was $154,000 and change there, and staff's recommendation is for $132,000. That difference is because the application includes the project management and miscellaneous sort of administrative costs under extraordinary circumstances. Staff doesn't find that that specific line item meets extraordinary circumstances, so they removed that request, but allowed it to max out the $40,000, if that makes sense. And the difference there is that $22,000. So that's why the staff request, or the staff recommendation is slightly different than the request. So this is not a landmarked home, so we're under a different conversation than we just had. This has made a request up to the $40,000 max, and then specifically outlined a number of line items that relate to extraordinary circumstances. Again, we're using that criteria that relates to all we have to work with, right? Architectural condition, details, condition, size, that sort of thing. So in reviewing this request, staff reviewed the foundation, and as noted in the staff report, certainly foundation work is common in older homes, but the size of the home, the condition, and the extent of the foundation that necessitates support, staff finds that this does meet extraordinary circumstances. We do, for example, see a little, sometimes they'll need the shoring up of one corner of a foundation. That's something we see that often comes under that $40,000. This is more extensive than that, and so it's a condition, relates to the condition of the foundation. So in terms of the siding, the wall structure, and the insulation, so all of these relate to redoing, taking down the existing asbestos siding and then restoring all of the siding. So a project of that scope with that work, that's what staff finds, would bring back the architectural detailing of the siding itself. So the cost to do that is so high, and it's related to a detail that you might want restored, right? The asbestos abatement, again, this is something that certainly we do see as a request when you're doing work on old homes, but based on the extent of the restoration that's requested, that's where the asbestos abatement cost kind of tips into that extraordinary circumstances. And then finally, the windows. Again, this is architectural details as well. So the proposal is to bring back basically all of the windows, certainly on the street-facing sides, to what they looked like previously, right? So to bring them to a single period of significance. That's also what this project is also doing. It's a single period. And so in order to do that, the cost is extraordinary, under the extraordinary circumstances to recapture that detail. So that's a little bit more in depth on that analysis. So staff's recommendation is to support all three of these resolutions. Resolution 14 would landmark the property and grant a $5,000 landmark bonus. Approval of Resolution 15 would approve the alteration certificate, and then approval of Resolution 16 would approve a grant up to the amount of $132,000. Just a reminder, that's a matching grant, and anything that they came in with, they would have to, like if they spent only $100,000, then they'd only get $50,000. If they only spent $200,000, they'd only get $100,000. So that's the max that they can go up to. Happy to answer any questions that you have.
Thank you. Any questions for staff?
My reading of the HSA was that the HVAC was in good condition, but it's listed as needing to be replaced under extraordinary circumstances. The HSA is attached.
Sorry, I'm not on. The HVAC is not part of the extraordinary circumstances request.
It doesn't add up to that 154 or 308,000, half of which is 154,000.
So the amount that's extraordinary circumstances is foundation, siding, wall structure, insulation, asbestos, and windows. So that's 95, 57 and change, 17 and change, and 14. That amount is extraordinary circumstances. The HVAC is covered up to the $40,000 grant. I can recheck the numbers, but that was the intent.
I just look, maybe I don't understand that table.
So all of this, by the way, is a recreation of what's in your report. So everything that's underlined here, that relates to extraordinary circumstances. Everything else goes toward maxing out the $40,000.
Oh, I see.
Maybe a better question for the applicant, but there was some verbiage in the HSA about the exterior being inspected as well as the crawl space from the exterior. I wasn't clear if they actually got into the crawl space and inspected it, or was it just inspected from the
Great question for the applicant.
Any other staff-specific questions?
5,000, I guess, but.
So I hate to ask you this, but can you take me through the math of the extraordinary circumstances items? That's about 184,000, those underlined items. And then the 40,000 grant. And is there some of those that are up to 50% or not? I mean, what would be the maximum? And honestly, I am most concerned here about foundation relative to extraordinary circumstances. I don't know if this is a total redo of a foundation or if this is the extraordinary circumstances rehabilitation of a foundation.
They're proposing a brand-new foundation.
Yeah, so it seems to me that that would be well beyond what just extraordinary circumstances is. So the math is important because I think I'm supportive of the concept. I'd like to kind of get to a number that seems a little more reasonable. That's, I shouldn't say it like that because that sounds like I'm trying to make it less. I'm just trying to understand what's in it and is it what we're trying to support?
Okay.
Making an informed decision.
Sort of, yeah.
So I think the detail of what's proposed is great for the applicant to talk about. But I will just say, in reviewing it, the HSA describes the need to redo the foundation. And so that's what, I mean, as not a structural engineer or an architect, that's what I'm looking for, that the HSA describes this is needed for the structural integrity of the home. And so that's how I do my analysis. I think in terms of the detail, great question for the architect. I don't know that I fully understand the difference between, I'm not sure that I fully understand the question on that side of things, because it seems like you're asking both for more of a description on the foundation, but also to talk about the math. So I'm happy to talk you through how I did the math, and then
Why don't we start
we
there?
start there.
Yeah.
Yeah, so all of these are matching everything that's requested. So you have to get to where we are here, an applicant has to come forward and say, my project costs more than $80,000, right, to max out the full $40,000. And then whatever's above that is extraordinary circumstances. So in this case, what we did, we took, so the amounts there in that column, those are the total amounts. So 95, 57, 17, 14 added together, and then it should be half. And then the others max out at 40. So I'm happy to double check in case I've made a mistake here in terms of the request. But that's sort of how the math works. And then the 40, it's not gonna all add up, because the 40,000, once you max out in those categories, we're not covering that, right? We're not covering, for example, the $22,000 that's additional over in the management line item, at least as staff is recommending.
Well, again, if the HVAC is in good condition, it wouldn't be part of the 40,000 or the extraordinary circumstances.
Yeah, so, I mean, to be honest, I don't remember exactly when I reviewed this, but when I went through it and I looked for what it said, and so I would ask the applicant to write, or to respond to the HVAC question specifically, but.
Okay.
Yeah.
It does say there's a slight sewer leak.
Okay.
Really, just a clarifying question about our funding opportunities, not necessarily, this isn't about this property per se, but these are all grants we keep talking about. We've got several of those, but we heard a property about 2 months ago maybe that we offered a loan to. And can you just kind of, for the commission, rehash kind of how the loans work?
Yep, absolutely. So there is a loan program. It's 2% below whatever prime is when the applicant puts in the application. So I think that most recent one, it was like at 9%, and so they came in at 7%. So they were able to have a loan at 7%. There might be some flexibility on these. We don't run the program as a city, but in general, they're 20-year terms. And there's sort of a two-part process to it. One is we review, is the work that's requested part of preservation, restoration, rehabilitation? The second part is the third-party analysis of the applicant's finances. In general, we've had 3 loans, I think, now successfully go through with, I understand, generally people of very different backgrounds. So I think, it's really meant to be sort of a loan program to enable this sort of factor. So it's sort of accessible, I guess, but it's not guaranteed, certainly. And so even if council approves it, if the Improvement
Underwriting.
Development Fund doesn't approve it, then they don't get the loan. So in general, what I've done recently, I've only processed one of them. I've asked the applicant to actually go through the IDF process at the same time, so we're not in a situation where they've gone all the way through council and then they're denied the loan from the lender, so for what that's worth.
And there's no dollar cap on that loan amount, correct?
There is no dollar cap, and there is also language that you can use, just to, and this would not be the same as the new construction conversation we had earlier. You could do it tonight. You could say, well, this feels like too big of a whatever the logic is, and we'd like to grant 80,000 of this and the rest in a loan. And then we'd use the application date that they had if they accept the loan, and then we'd put it at prime, and then we'd bring that to council. So you could do that tonight, I guess, is my point. But of course, then it's up to the applicant whether that's of interest to them.
Would you bear with me to review the math? Because I think I have it. And it's really in preface to a question to the applicants to sort of talk about some of the amounts. But the extraordinary items, 95 in the foundation, 57 for the siding, 17.5 for the asbestos, and 14 for the windows is 184. We're funding that at 50%, so that's 92,000. We're adding to that the 40,000 of the other items, which is the 132 that the grant request is.
Right.
And the 40,000 is really a total of 58 of the other 4 items, the roofing and gutters of 12, electrical plumbing of 23, drainage of 35, and porch of 20. Those total 58, we're saying 40 of that, so.
And also the management.
Oh, there's some of the management in there,
Right,
but not in extraordinary circumstances.
right, exactly.
But
So
it's
all
over the
of
40
those.
cap already, so it's sort of
Right.
immaterial. Okay, all right, so really, my question for the applicants is really kind of the extraordinary circumstances items and how they're extraordinary.
All right, any more questions for staff before we move on to the applicant? All right, thank you.
What did you have? You had foundation, siding, asbestos.
And then for the record, if you'll just state your name and city that you live in.
Yep. I'm Jessica Bronson, and I currently live in Boulder, Colorado. So yeah, thank you for hearing us out tonight. I know it's late, and I apologize if I don't make a lot of sense. I'm not great at public speaking, and it's past my bedtime. So just to review, we met all of the landmark designation points of being 50 years old, architecturally significant. On the social side, the house is really, really cool. I've gotten to hang out in the neighborhood a lot and met a lot of the neighbors and talked to the niece and nephew of Dory who lived there. Their family built it in 1905. Her dad actually built it, and he died in the mining collapse. And then her mom took over the house, and then she did, and then she lived there till she was 94. So I'm the first person who's ever purchased this house. I'm super proud to do so, being like a Colorado native. I was born and raised Boulder Community Hospital. And so I've just really fallen in love with the house and the story and her love of gardening and her role in the neighborhood and just getting to know everyone in the area. Anyways, keeping it short, the location, and it does have the same footprint, so that's all the landmark designations. And then alterations, we really want to restore the siding to the pre-1948 siding, and I want to also bring it back to one of the historic colors. The windows, we want to go pre-1948, bring it back to how it used to be, differentiate the 1990s part of the house, and then demolish and replace the porch. And then under the extraordinary circumstances, which is where we've got a lot of the questions, our first part is the foundation, and this one, I was hoping to get in there and find that we could just, prop up a corner, help out a couple spots, but the entire foundation was built by miners instead of architects, so it's just on like rocks. There's sections where it's literally just stumps from the trees that used to be there, and they built right on the stumps instead of using wood or rock or bringing anything in. And on the siding, a lot of the issue there is once we go to do the siding, we had to get the asbestos test, and that means that you have to get the outside tested, the inside tested, and we need to make it into a safer home that's inhabitable. And then the windows, we want to bring that back to the architectural details that were once there. And yeah, I've gotten a request from Dory that it be called the DeSantis House. And she just really loves it, and the neighbors love it. And we would love the chance to repair this piece of Colorado history and keep it here for hopefully another 118 years or more. Okay, that's all I have to say. And this is my architect, Peter.
Good evening. Peter Stewart, Stewart Architecture. I'm also a resident of Old Town. Actually, I live a couple blocks away from this property, so it's near and dear to me. I'll just kind of tell you how we came into it. When Jesse asked us to look at it, we met out there with a structural engineer, contractor, myself, kind of on our first visit out there. And the condition is in poor shape. I mean, basically, it's one of those houses where the contractors would tell you, you're going to be better off just to scrape it off and start all over. And sometimes we get that. But because of its history and because of Jesse's dedication to it and the connection with the family, we wanted to see what could be done to preserve it, restore it as it is. As you could see if you went through the exhibits and saw the photos, our approach was, well, first is if we do since it was in poor condition, we have to do some kind of renovation to it, which means, okay, we got to deal with the asbestos. So dealing with asbestos meant all the exterior siding had to come off and just about all of the interior wall finishes. So we're almost gutting it inside and outside at that point. Then it's like, well, once you take the asbestos siding off, what do you have? You have the original siding, which we hope is in good condition, the pre-1948. And then the pre-1948, it wouldn't make sense to restore the casement windows that were associated with the asbestos siding. So then that kicks us into replacing all the windows, which they probably need to be replaced or repaired because of their condition anyway. So anyway, so the one thing kind of led to the other in terms of our approach and taking it back to the 1910 period, the siding, the windows, and the architectural character. We are basing this on historic photos, and we'll have to base more of it on in terms of in the construction phase, verifying where we see openings, where we see the studs. And so there's going to be a step that we'd hope to work with the commission and with staff in terms of fine-tuning some of those details, exactly how big are the windows, that type of thing. In terms of the extraordinary circumstances, our firm has worked on dozens, if not 100, restorations, rehabilitations. We deal with a lot of historic structures. We got in there with the structural engineer down in the crawl space, with the headlamps and the dust mask, and went through there and tried our best to figure out a way where we could just supplement the existing foundations. We did kind of come up with one plan where we could build a whole new foundation system just inside of the existing brick. But even the engineer says, well, we need to get this down to frost, and we could probably do some repairs to the existing brick, which might get us another 5 years, 10 years, maybe. But we wanted to come up with a solution that was going to be a 100-year solution. So it was with some regret that we had to bite the bullet and say, well, it needs a whole new foundation system. And so that was a huge part of that extraordinary expenses. And then, like I was saying, the asbestos siding, the asbestos removal, the window replacement, those were also kind of above and beyond what we're used to seeing. Yeah, we would hope to have historic windows which we could repair, but that wasn't the case here. And in terms of the historic preservation program, the fund, the way I think about it is these funds are there to help fill a gap between what you would normally do, which in this case might be a scrape off, and fill that gap in terms of preserving, restoring the historic fabric, the historic structure, those historic elements that are important to the town. It's an important resource. So I know this is a lot bigger of a project than most, but it's not a one-size-fits-all thing. And that's why it requires our judgment and your judgment in terms of what this house needs. And it certainly needs a lot more than, say, the house next door or the house down the street. So I'm here to answer any. Oh, I'll just go ahead and jump into your question, Gary, about the HSA. When we go through it with the HSA, we say, we are looking at each element separately, not like what a whole construction project would involve. So when the whole foundations have to be replaced, the floor structure has to be replaced. Maybe that HVAC system is fine like it is, but when you do that, then all of a sudden you have to have jacking and shoring. You have to remove all the ductwork to get the new beams in. Maybe we can reuse the furnace, but most of that work is in terms of the whole construction process. We have to remove all the ducts to get the foundations in and the framing and the shoring, and those have to be replaced afterwards. So that's why that was kind of bulked together, the electrical, plumbing, HVAC. That's not just repairing those pieces, but to actually coordinate them and integrate them with everything that has to be done with the project. And I'm happy to answer any additional questions you guys have.
Thank you.
I believe you answered my earlier question to Amelia about the crawl space inspection. So you were able to get in and inspect the crawl space from the...
Yeah, we did it on multiple times. Actually, JVA was a structural engineer, and his reports in the HSA, Ian Glazer, who's like a really great expert in working with historic structures. And we both were crying a little bit that we couldn't come up with a better solution, but that was the best recommendation for the building.
Can you explain how the floor structure is intended to be replaced?
Oh, it's not going to be replaced. It's going to be reinforced.
Okay.
Like a lot of houses in Old Town, it started to sag over the years, and when you get in the crawl space, you'll see they had put in some pipe columns and some jacking and some shoring in there to pick up the mid-spans. So we're going to do a combination of a beam in the mid-spans, and there was some damage due to water leaks, and there was other damage over time. There were certain places where the joists were cut out for whatever reason. So all that's going to be repaired. I don't have it right in front of me, but there was a lot of like sistering of existing floor joists, and then the new structural beams in there. And again, it probably wasn't super clear in here, but those costs were only associated with the 1910 building, not the 1990s edition, which was actually in pretty decent shape. It has a good foundation. All the floor joists are fine, so there's really no foundation or floor joist work in that space on the very western portion of the building.
And how would you see the sequencing of the new foundation? Are you simply lifting the house, or is it going to be moved off-site temporarily and brought back?
No, we don't think we even need to lift it. We're just going to shore it in place, kind of hold it where it is. pull out the foundation that's there, go in, under excavate it, pour the footers, pour the stem walls, and bring it right up to the floor structure. It'll be platform framed, kind of. There's still a lot of unknowns. I mean, a lot of that rim joist, some of it's been damaged and it might need to be replaced. So, the contract, he's not guaranteeing. I kind of say that with a joke, but we are going to have to get in there and determine the exact scope and repairs as we go through it. And that could make the price of the work either go up or come down, because he's just kind of throwing a number at it, which he feels is adequate, but not guaranteed.
First, thanks very much for your presentation.
Oh, sure.
And you have answered my questions about some of the foundations, and I actually, on the windows and asbestos and other components, was less concerned. And I imagine some of those crawl space inspection days were some of the longest days of your life.
The dirtiest, yeah.
Any other questions for the applicant? Make sure that Keith doesn't have any. Do it.
I think we've lost him. He's not on the Zoom call.
Oh,
at the
okay.
moment, so.
All right. All right, thank you. There's no public, so we'll bring it back for discussion. So this is a perfect, Marty, here we go you can see the difference in extraordinary versus our last one, so.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
I can appreciate the foundation work that appears to be needed. And as Peter mentioned, oftentimes we're able to shore up the foundation, add a helical pier, or do what's needed to shore up the existing foundation. But in this case, it sounds like it doesn't make sense to try and put a bandage on it and let it survive for another 5 or 10 years. So I can see the foundation being an extraordinary circumstance. Some of the other items, although, asbestos, I feel like you're gonna run into asbestos on every historic project. Siding, windows, again, is that extraordinary, or is that typical of this type of project? So again, I think that's what we need to decide.
I didn't get a chance to thoroughly review the HSA. Did the HSA call for the siding to be removed and the insulation to be removed? That's what the alteration certificate's asking for. But did the HSA call for that in particular?
I don't know if it called for it from a preservation perspective or not. I'd have to review, but again, that's a restoration project. So it's more a question of whether the details are of value, that bringing it back to that single historic, period of significance, that's the question with the siding and the windows.
Right, and that's why I ask, because, we're considering 3 different things. And the alteration certificate asks for the siding. And once you open up and the porch, and once you open up, even just do the porch, there's asbestos on the porch. And you gentlemen, as architects, know better than we do. Could they just do the porch and sort of modify that to get that more national style look, and not compromise the siding and just open up more asbestos on the apart from the porch? And if you do the siding on the house, that's certainly, the windows need to be remediated or mitigated then. So. Right, so, we could not approve the alteration certificate, which will then reduce the cost by the siding and porch and windows remaining. They're also asking for landmarking. Landmarking considers many factors, so it potentially could still be landmarked. So I'm just trying to parcel out all the different things here. And again, like the HSA clearly denoted the foundation as problematic, right? But if the HSA didn't find any problem areas with the siding, if that's more of a consideration for kind of the style and maybe not landmarking, it's just good to think about.
So you're saying the siding replacement would be more of a preference, like they could choose whether to do that or not, but it's not part of the
Potentially,
Right.
right. And again, it is true because the porch, the house fits a lot of the criteria for landmarking. Like it fits a lot of the criteria. I think, just me personally, if there's one alteration thing to approve, maybe it'd be that porch because that looks the most modified. Other than the siding, the porch looks the most modified, and taking that porch back to more original look would make, I think, a big visual difference, big visual historic difference, historic look. But again, I'm not sure if you can take that porch, take siding off the porch, because that siding is kind of right attached to the porch siding is attached to the older siding. So,
right? So I guess we could just go ahead and start with landmarking. That's a more straightforward piece.
I agree.
So this house definitely meets the age requirement of 50 years or older, has strong social significance, especially the fact that it's just recently been even owned outside the family. And then it's maintained architectural integrity with those changes also having 50 years or older. So as far as the siding and the porch changes and windows and stuff. So it's a strong candidate. It's on Front Street, which I'm excited about, just to have more presence of landmarks on Front Street. So yeah, that's the landmark piece of the application.
I appreciate the proposal of the project, and I agree that it's good to have a way to have a house like this not be scraped. So as far as it being landmarked and the direction of the work, I think is good. I, again, though, go back to the definition of extraordinary circumstances. How a house is purchased this year, all of these things need to be done to a house, and it shouldn't be a surprise. That the foundation is what it is. I can understand you want to remediate the asbestos siding, but it's visible. It's right there. The electrical problems, they're in the HSA, things like that. So for me, it's more a matter of the funding based on extraordinary circumstances. It's a kicker, which we will have to decide how we want to deal with that.
Yeah, I think it opens up a larger question as far as our funding. I think right now we're caught in this definition of extraordinary circumstances, and maybe as we move forward and we can discuss enlarging our grant allowance significantly, potentially, and then using the extraordinary circumstance where it really applies. But like I said, I do agree that, or believe that the foundation could meet the extraordinary circumstance needing to be replaced completely. But some of the other items, not so much.
So,
So as far as a landmark,
Yes.
yeah, let's kind of go back to that and we can check that
Sure.
off the list, and then we can really dive deeper into the alteration certificate and grant request once we know if we're going to landmark it or not. So
I make a motion to landmark 1045 Front Street.
I'll second it.
we'll do a roll call, please.
Commissioner Anderson,
Yes.
Commissioner Beaucamp,
Yes.
Commissioner Dahlia,
Yes.
Commissioner Berg,
yes.
Commissioner Dunlap,
Yes?
and Chair Haley.
Yes.
Clerk? No, he's gone.
But, right. signed off. All right, so now we can go into more depth about right, and so the extraordinary, again, is the foundation, siding wall, structure, insulation.
Asbestos
Yeah.
windows.
So, Amelia, can you put up table 2 from your presentation and take us through the staff analysis of extraordinary circumstance requests? Because I think we're all coming at this a little bit differently. Some are, it's an old house and we should have known. Everybody knows this has got to get fixed, and some of these are about architectural details. So kind of take us through the reasoning and logic. I think this is a good chart.
Okay, so I'm going to start at just advance apologies for belaboring a point, but I want to start with what the actual extraordinary circumstances criteria that we have to work with. So I've shown you here. I think this is going to take 1,000 years because the packet is so large to load it. But just to be clear again, this is the language that is relevant. The grant limitations exceeded in these circumstances. A showing of extraordinary circumstances, I mean, frankly, there's also a way in which you could say a showing of, you know, something else, circumstances or larger, intense, or something else other than that phrase, right? Because that phrase isn't related to any other law that exists. It's just the language that is in this resolution. So it's relating to building size, condition, architectural details, or other unique conditions. So that's the backdrop. Staff analysis here, and completely acknowledging and knowing that this is something this commission and staff, long before some of us, myself included, have been involved in this, right? We've talked about this issue since 2019, probably, I would hazard, right? So there is discretion. So the way that staff looks at this is, first of all, we ask the applicant, you have to tell us what you think is extraordinary about this. I don't go out and do the homework for them, right? They have to come and describe to me why does this cost this much? So that's where we started. We had a conversation, and that's where these 4 things came from the applicant who knows the project and whose project it is, who's invested in this. So then from there, I look at, okay, the language that I have. I try to relate it. Does it have to do with the size of a building? That's an easy one, right? HPC and City Council have approved large construction projects on houses that are significantly bigger than your average house in Louisville. So that's one way I think that's very clear of looking at it, because again, the language says condition architectural details compared to your average Louisville home. So those are the sort of the 2 pieces if you want to think about it that way. So again, with the mind of trying to make a little bit of sense out of what is probably meant to be a flexible language, looked at not as setting precedent, but as what the HPC has previously approved. The HPC has previously, in general terms, approved extensive foundation works, situations where you've had to lift up the entire house to do the foundation, situations where you've had to add a sister wall, or where, in their case, you have to build the entire foundation. Those are different than, I think, what we generally see as shoring up a corner of a foundation, right? So that's how staff looked at that piece. In terms of the siding, the wall structure, and the insulation, the asbestos abatement, and the windows, it was a different type of analysis based on the detail. The HPC has previously, again, you're not required to do this tonight, but has previously approved projects that have restored, done extensive restorations around the entirety of the house to bring it back to a period of significance. That's what's proposed here tonight. So staff, in analyzing this, thought, okay, siding, back to one period. Windows, back to one period. Those cost a lot because of the age of the new siding, right? The fact that it's an asbestos siding that was replaced, the fact that all of it on this structure was replaced. I, also think there's an argument that it's 2 street-facing, sides. So this is extensive work on, a lot of visible parts of the house. The asbestos abatement alone, absolutely, that's something that could come under $40,000 easily because it happens all the time. But as you've heard from the applicant, and this is again going to staff's recommendation, the extent of that abatement is higher than your average home. That's something that the HPC has found previously, so staff, in trying to calibrate what's of the interest and what makes sense, is recommending that this, right, also is sort of a similar project. Same thing for the windows. The windows do cost more to get them to look like the way that you want them to look, theoretically. right? Because again, we've seen even tonight, other projects where cost was an issue. They're not going all the way to redoing the windows entirely. This proposal is, this is architectural details. I think it would be a lot easier if it were some ornate Gothic cathedral and you could say those gargoyles are architectural details that we want to invest in. That's not the history of Louisville, right? This arguably is the history of Louisville. So that's, I'm just expounding more broadly so I can try to take you through how we use both really strictly the criteria that we have, and also, because it is a flexible criteria, how we kind of try to say this is what we'd recommend that relates to preserving the history, preserving, restoration or allowing restoration projects that are as extensive as this one.
I think it is, worth noting, like you said, that all of this work, all of these grants would be towards the goal of bringing it back to that area of significance, which again, with the first property we looked at tonight, we kind of put a pause on that. We're going to completely reconsider it because there were 2 areas of significance and we struggled with that. So just kind of worth noting, like, this one would be doing the full job. It's expensive. It's a big cost. If we were, right now, if they were to get the $40,000 landmark preservation grant plus the $5,000 landmark incentive grant, then we could do a $50,000 extraordinary circumstances, which will cover the foundation, so that would be $95,000. That would leave, some more money, like there would still be a gap. We could up that, we could offer a loan. So just kind of exploring options, but also notably, I didn't think about, it is, Front Street doesn't have a ton of landmark properties or a ton of like fully restored properties. It is two sides street facing, which I didn't think about. So it's a tough one.
So when I first saw this, I actually probably wasn't that supportive. I became to understand what they are and the criteria. And as I look at the foundation, siding, asbestos, and windows, what's being asked for in extraordinary, what's making up the 40, the total of 132 for what you're trying to do with the property, totally in keeping with what the Historic Preservation Commission is trying to do with properties in Louisville, I'm very supportive of that.
To throw some more information into the mix. So I did find the HSA. It's in, if anybody has the packet up, it's page 76. But it talks about the exterior wall construction. It says the wood-framed stud wall with exterior fiber sheathing. The fiber sheathing is deteriorated. The wall construction is suffering from movement in the foundation system. So the evaluation is fair, and the recommendation is to reinforce the wall framing in coordination with other structural repairs. The exterior finishes is also fair. I don't maybe need to read the description, but the recommendation was to remove the fiber shingles containing asbestos and evaluate the wood shiplap for restoration, and then replace the wood shiplap with like material where damages are beyond repair. So that is what the HSA, that's what they found. So the evaluation for some of those materials were good, like the porch was good, but these two, the exterior wall and exterior finishes, were fair with recommendations for work.
Yeah, I think I probably had a little bit of sticker shock in the beginning, especially for like the size of the house, for the amount, like all those kind of things. But I think having looked over it, like as I started reading the details and hearing more tonight, I think, I mean, a lot of our homes do have foundation issues, but not to the extent of this. And I think, the fact that they are taking the whole structure back is very significant. So I think, yeah, so I think I've definitely been more open to the larger amount. But, and that doesn't mean that I'm not open for discussion or possibly loan or all those kind of things. I think the HSA helps a lot too. Just that probably the siding does need to be replaced in the near future, which is gonna be asbestos, but maybe that means that that's a common thing in Louisville that the historic homes run into sometimes, but. So that's kind of where I am.
Here's the exterior asbestos work is pretty minor compared to the total asbestos request. And it appears that a large portion of the interior work is based on remodeling, moving the kitchen, a different layout on the interior, which is going to require the walls to be opened up, and then obviously asbestos mitigation. So I feel like that's a choice of a remodel as opposed to rehabilitation or,
So separating the interior from the exterior.
yeah.
The siding could come off to be, the asbestos siding could come off, be remediated. So I was talking this through. The sheathing could be addressed. And then the drywall, the interior drywall could remain.
If you give a mouse a cookie, you familiar with that book?
No, is it?
No.
It just
Yeah,
wouldn't, like,
once you open up the exterior, then you're opening up the windows, replacing windows or whatnot, and then does that trigger the interior?
Right.
Maybe not all the walls need to be opened up, but with a proposed remodel on the inside, then most of the walls are then being opened up. So all the asbestos on the interior, it makes sense to mitigate all that at the same time. So I guess I'm going back and forth. I feel like the interior is based on choice. The exterior obviously is needed based on the wall condition and the siding needing to be replaced and sheathing and on and on.
We don't typically do this, but would the applicant like to speak to the asbestos interior versus exterior as far as parceling it?
Oh, there we go. Peter Stewart again. You know, anytime you do any restoration work, we're going to have an asbestos survey. And when we do the asbestos survey, which we've already done, we find out that there's the exterior siding and all the interior wall finishes. So before you can get a building permit, you have to mitigate. Before you can get a building permit to do anything, we have to mitigate the asbestos. So that means all the interior wall finishes have to go. It's almost like an interior demolition down to studs. And so we're kind of there before we do anything.
You would have to do
So,
interior and exterior at the same time, even if you were just doing the exterior siding.
Yeah. Yeah.
I
And then
will
on
s-
top of that, to do the structural inside of the wall, Jessica Bronson. And to do like the structural inside of the wall to rebuild where the foundation has caused damage, we have to be able to access all of that wood and all of the interiors of the walls. So that means that we have to do the asbestos to get that out of there, to then redo those wood boards and then go from there. So not just and a lot of our walls actually in the like renovation aren't moving or being touched for like aesthetic reasons. We just have to redo them.
Right. Yeah. So, I mean,
that
I
make
guess I
sense?
wouldn't characterize it as by choice. I mean, the only choice we're making is we want to make the house livable and habitable. And to do that, we need to get a building permit, and then, you know how that goes. Hopefully that answers the question.
I will state that asbestos is, if it remains encapsulated and you're not disturbing it, is not a has to be removed harmful item. It's whenever you start to get into it. And I would say if you're going through a foundation or anything of that sort, I can only imagine there's going to be some cracking, shoring, anything else on the interior. And I can tell you the interior finishes in at least a few of these rooms do not look like they're in great repair or great condition right now. Joints are coming untaped. There's no real I guess consistent finish on them would be a good way to put it. I could see that you're going to get into a decent amount of that, and especially if they don't have any trim on the interior, so I would see the drywall wrap on everything. You're going to have to cut that back to a certain extent, and then you're going to have to put your windows in, and then you're going to have to try to patch back up to that, which at that point, I don't know if it's any cheaper than taking it off, to be honest.
Plus
And
encapsulation costs money too. So if you were to keep it, you're also encapsulating it, which is expensive.
And again, if
Yeah.
you don't touch it, it's when it becomes airborne.
Yeah. So,
But it sounds like if they're doing foundation work and they have to get up in the walls at all.
I would say typically you're going to have to the point where if you're doing the interior or the exterior, that you'd have one access point.
Right.
Yeah. You know, to have both is great, right? But I would say if you're doing structural stuff and you're already taking off the exterior side, and you attack it from the exterior side. If you're doing interior, you attack it from the interior side. That's just kind of common construction.
Does anyone have recommendations of how they would change the amount if you still have issues with the full amount? As far as
I don't know exactly how to change it right now, but this is a lot more than anything else that I've been a part of here, so there's a reason for my quiet nature.
And we've had large amounts recently, but they were much larger scale projects. So, like square footage ratio to amount would be a lot different. So, but I think on the flip side, this house was not built well in the first place, so it had a lot going against it for years. So that's kind of another piece of it is some of the larger properties that we gave more money to, it was more because they were larger or in maybe more disrepair or tricky situations, but this is kind of different as far as having to reconstruct something that wasn't done by necessarily craftsmen. So another piece to kind of consider.
yeah, I mean, just for context, like the Baptist Church on Pine Street, that was, I believe that was one of the first ones when I came on board. I don't know if it was in extraordinary circumstances or just fell under a different category, but that's a very notable structure in the community, had multiple uses, you know, just for reference. But I don't know, I think it's nice to see a house that's a smaller house and will be, you know, right, like it's actually kind of special it was not built by craftsmen and, you know, stayed in this family for so long and at least for some time, it'll be landmarked, so it'll have to, if it's altered in any way moving forward, maybe including, you know, a new addition, it would have to come in front of us, but for at least the time being, it will become a smaller historic home in Louisville, which is kind of nice, a little different than some different trends we're seeing right now. So I guess, I think I'm mostly supportive of this request. Without like really seeing a way that we could get these costs down and seeing all this work that's all connected and, you know, I'm trying to think what the other options are. You know, there's obviously the scrape option. Like, I don't know where, if we don't approve this, I'm not sure where this, what other things are in mind for the house, but it's habitable now, I suppose, but the foundation will continue to degrade, right, this stuff, and maybe that'll be decades, maybe not, but it'll be more expensive to repair down the road if that's a route that the city wants to go, the commission wants to go, you know, or it could be scraped. So I think with those things in mind, I'm, you know, open to approving the grant amounts.
I guess a couple questions I still have. You know, you have like roofing and gutters on here. I'm like, well, that one's kind of like, everybody has roofing and gutter items when you come up with a house or whatever else, but sometimes I'm wondering if I'm nitpicking on this one. I guess on my end, I would rely on others' opinions and staff recommendation for my part on this one. And that's probably where I'm gonna hang my hat.
Well, and I guess the way staff explained it was that would fall under the 40
Yeah.
grant. So
That-
we're looking specifically at things that are extraordinary,
Yep.
which would be these 4 things. So,
The foundation's for sure. I have no
Right.
issue with the foundation.
yeah, I agree. Like, we all have to do roofs and gutters on our own homes. But if that qualifies, like, do we keep that in the 40 or, I don't know. So,
Yep.
because I don't know would these fit? Yeah, I don't know how we would like rearrange things or.
Again, I'm not looking at, I'm just looking at whatever was
Right, absolutely.
recommended at this point for myself, and I can respect the logic behind it. And have one of these larger ones under my belt, I guess.
Yeah. Welcome to the commission. Yeah.
Should we?
So I guess we can make a motion if someone wants to make a motion, or if anyone has, I feel like no one has had any strong alternative ideas as far as amounts or what we would take out. So if someone feels like we can make a motion,
For the alteration certificate first?
yes. So, right, so that's just the work for restoring the property to basically the original look and
Okay.
size materials.
I'd like to make a motion to approve the alteration certificate for 1045 Front Street.
I'll second that.
We'll do a roll call, please.
Commissioner Anderson,
Yes.
Commissioner Beaucamp,
Yes.
Commissioner Dahlia,
Yes.
Commissioner Berg,
Yes.
Commissioner Dunlap,
Yes.
Chair Haley.
Yes. And then for the actual grant request,
I would move that we approve a grant request for the maximum of $40,000.
Is it two separate requests?
So can
We're
we-
going to vote on?
so if that's not the actual amount in the grant request, can we do that, or how does that work?
Yeah, so if you want to approve an amount different than what's written in the resolution, then you would just need a condition of approval for whatever amount you'd like to approve.
Okay, so we would vote on that one.
But you're not thinking of this being two, you're thinking
Right.
This would be the max amount that we would give a grant for.
And, yeah, I don't know what Commissioner Dunlap's intention was, but the total grant amount is what is in one resolution, right?
That stands. Okay.
So they're requesting 154, staff approved 132, and Gary just requested 40?
40,000, yeah.
That being the max is just 40.
Guess nobody's going to second that. Okay.
Does sound
We have another
correct.
motion? Do what?
Yeah, I'm going to try a new motion. Again, I said I had a lot of questions to begin with. I looked at the numbers a lot of different ways. You know, if you say 92 plus 40, and that's the whole foundation, that's, you know, I'm sorry, 95 plus 40, the whole foundation would be 135,000. Staff recommends 132, and I realize I'm taking 100% of the foundation, so I'm doing some funny math. But if I look at the components, the 50% of how we get to the 92 plus 40, and the total of 132, I'm pretty comfortable with it. I think what we're doing here is taking a property back to, it looks to be as close to original as we can. So I submit a motion that we approve the staff recommended amount of 132 as a grant for 1045 Front Street.
I'll second that.
And we'll do a roll call, please.
Commissioner Anderson,
Yes.
Commissioner Beaucamp,
Yes.
Commissioner Dahlia,
Yes.
Commissioner Berg,
Yes.
Commissioner Dunlap,
No.
and Chair Haley.
Yes. All right, so thank you. Thank you for staying this whole entire night. This is like the old days, we used to stay here till 10 or 10:30. But we appreciate everyone's discussion of all these. These were all three of these were very important discussions for us to have. And I think with our new commission, this will give us material for future discussions of really how to make our program better and just be able to navigate it.
If I may just add on that, because Amelia, I know, is trying to put together an agenda for a breakout working session. And I would ask that we add the extraordinary expenditure item to that working session, because I think we need some guardrails that we find ourselves applying this a little more consistently and under different situations where grants have been applied, have not, et cetera. So can we just add that to our agenda as our working session?
Yes, I'm really concerned about the precedent.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Of, you know, spending whatever is asked for to bring a property, you know, into 21st century stability. Anyway, it's where I'm coming from.
I feel the same way, although I came around when I looked at what was being requested. It's not quite 50% of the total project cost. And to restore a house back to basically original without proposing additions, I know they can in the future come back and ask for some of that stuff, but so yeah, that's right. I wasn't completely on board either. I think I was leaning more towards you, Gary, but.
And thank you, everybody, for the good discussions. Really got those three together in there, Amelia. Make it tough for us, but they all were connected. I mean, it was really actually all one big discussion that was really valuable.
Well, that's great.
So with items 6 and 7, are we moving forward with those right now?
Items 6 and 7. Oh yes, I think I can give some brief updates, but I'll turn to Chair Haley if you want to table the discussion on the video.
Yeah, maybe we can.
That's
30-minute discussion. No. I think the HPC, the evaluating integrity, was helpful. Did anyone think it was? I thought it was good. So just the 36 different things that the national parks gives as far as other ways to show significance and kind
Agree.
of going through all those projects was kind of long, but it was helpful just to kind of see what she said about them, and I feel like we run into a lot of those. So anyway, I thought it was valuable.
Yeah.
And I hope everyone got a chance to watch it. And does anyone have any comments or?
I thought it would be good if they had shown or demonstrated one project that appeared to be historic and
Right.
that
I thought maybe
that
that first
wasn't.
one wasn't gonna
Right.
be, like, maybe they put a new
agree.
roof or
I kept being
something.
like, where's the hidden one?
I
It's actually in there,
know.
but
Right.
they were all historic.
Right,
so.
I agree with that, for sure.
It was interesting. I did find it interesting. I can't remember the name of the property all, but it was the very large home, the white home.
Stanley?
Yeah, maybe.
yeah.
I don't remember what it was called, but it met, it didn't meet the national standard.
Correct.
Because the siding, again, but it met like somewhat lower standards. So again, that's good to remember that like we, at this level, don't always have to adhere to the national standards in terms of
Right.
them marking and other things. But there's also, those materials are quite important, or make a difference anyway.
Not really to be answered tonight, but it begged the question. Not to be answered, but it begged the question for me, how do we, or should we, or do we interlock with state preservation and national preservation guidelines? Because I've never heard or never thought about any of our properties being on any of those registers, and should they?
Right, and we have a couple that are on the national, but our designation is actually stronger than the national designation as far as, isn't that correct? Like, they can, there's kind of a, in the same way that we have more
National
control.
and state landmarks don't really restrict somebody from tearing
Right.
it down or altering the front, although they probably run into
Isn't that
trouble.
correct? Yeah, so we actually have more control over local than national, but there are, we do have a few national around.
Benefit by having any state?
Right,
That was really the question.
right,
Yeah.
like as a city, do we
Yeah,
benefit or?
Yeah, Louisville has 15 properties that are also Colorado designated.
Are there state landmarks? Or designations or anything? I don't know if I've ever heard
There
of that.
are state programs. I'm actually not technically sure if they're programs to list nationally or if they are state-specific lists. I think you can be listed for state-level significance, though, so there must be a
Okay.
separate condition. Yeah.
So. Yeah,
Like, we watched it.
yeah,
We
good
got
job.
something out of it.
Good job, that was it, yeah. So I'll find another one, probably, I don't know if we'll get another one in this year, you think? I don't know.
You guys have done a great job.
Yeah, I think we're good.
You can
So
turn
we'll-
it over
we'll pick
2024.
Yeah, we'll pick up next year, but.
Okay, so I'll try to keep these brief. We had one alteration certificate for the Tomeo House, the chimney, which is on the museum campus. The chimney needed to be updated. The brick is falling apart, so that was released at subcommittee, and no demolition reviews. So regular meeting, new date, November 27th. I know that some of you are going to be virtual. That's totally fine. We'll make it work. We'll be in the spruce room. But November 13th didn't end up working because it's too quick for our museum to turn over some reports, it turned out. So November 27th it is. Really appreciate you guys turning around for the Monday after Thanksgiving. And if you all need to be virtually, that's also an option. We can talk about that. I just need a little bit of heads up to make it work. So I think tonight is definitely a great example of why we need to talk more broadly about the program. I would say we can talk offline about the new construction piece. I think we can talk at the end if anybody wants to talk about that. I'd prefer not to bring it in November for my own reasons of I think it's probably better for us to have a holistic conversation rather than slot that one through without sort of talking about how it relates to zoning and all these other pieces. But of course, if you'd like to bring a resolution, like me to bring a resolution, I can investigate. But at the December retreat, there's no single time that works yet. We have 4 out of 5 respondents who can make the December 2nd. But I'd really love it if everybody was there in some way, shape, or form. So I'm going to try again maybe for early January, give you guys some other dates. I know that pushes things out, but I think it's actually valuable for everybody to be there if we can. So I'll give you an update on 809 grant next month. Stuff is happening. And then I also had a couple of other notes really quick. From our conversation. One was to say that yes, Commissioner Dahlia, the conversation about extraordinary circumstances is already on my agenda to talk about in December or January, whenever we get together. I don't want to go too much into this, but just a reminder that, when it comes to new construction or anything that's landmarked, we do design review. So nobody can make any changes that the HPC doesn't allow, right? So again, like, I heard there's so much going on tonight. It really was a good discussion. But just a reminder that incentivizing something that's already landmarked, they don't have an option. So it's up to the zoning and it's up to the design review, the strength of design review, to get what we want, so to speak, right? Once a property is landmarked. So just a reminder that the design review is there and can be used to push people to do compatible design.
Quick question, please.
Yeah.
It's been on the back of my mind. Is there anybody that oversees these projects through the execution of construction to make sure that they do meet what we approve grants for?
Yep, it's me. So I do the inspections for the properties. Usually I do them at the end, which can take a really long time. For some of them, I've done them in the middle. But yeah, absolutely. So I think another thing, if you're all willing to indulge me, maybe a brief presentation on what all I do before you guys see these presentations and after, because I have a feeling that might be helpful. Behind the scenes.
Can it be 376 pages?
That's another thing. I having put this packet together, I understand that it was a long freaking packet, and I would like it.
I'm not jealous.
I totally hear you. Yes, I will make my presentation. I'll make it a 3-hour presentation about all the things I do. No, but I think that so that you know, right? I mean, you're all meant to guide the fund in a way that I'm not, right? I don't have the authority that you have, but I do a lot of the technical pieces that I think this conversation showed up are already, well, whether you find them to be adequate or not is a different question, and I'm happy to take critiques and constructive criticism on how to do my job better. But a lot of it is done before and after. So I think maybe just a conversation about that so you can see none of the 3 items that you saw or cases that you saw, none of those were the first draft of the grants or the alterations. Those are actually multiple iterations, multiple months to get before you. Doesn't mean they're perfect. It just means that a lot of this has sort of already gone through sort of, the tumbler to take off the rough edges. So I also think maybe, these are all just things for y'all to consider, it might be really great for us to ask our state representative to have an architect who doesn't work in Louisville come out and explain some of this stuff to us a little bit more. I think that might be really helpful because I think, I understand a little bit of it, but all this, what does it actually mean to take something down to the studs and have to mitigate, remediate all the asbestos, things like that. I know you all know, but it might be helpful to have that as well. So things that I can facilitate as needed. And then the final thing I'd say is 601 Lincoln. I'll just provide the bare facts of this because it was added to the agenda. And then if there are any questions, I'm happy to answer questions, but we do have to be really careful about not having a discussion. Okay, so 601 Lincoln is a property up on Lincoln Avenue. It's near a landmark property that was just landmarked late last year, 600 Lincoln. It's right across the street for those who are on the commission. And it came through in 2021, and it was approved by HPC as a conservation easement in exchange for basically, colloquially, a grant, but actually a purchase. So because there's no grant program for conservation easements for residential properties, there is a grant structure if you want to do a conservation easement on a facade downtown, for instance. You can get grant funds through that. There's not a process for that for residential, something we can discuss maybe at our retreat eventually. But in this case, the HPC and the city have the ability to basically buy an easement from a residence, right? From a residential property owner. That's what was proposed for this property. At the time, a resolution update to allow that type of proposal, that type of project to come forward in the future was also proposed. HPC said they did not want to look at that or approve it at that time, largely because having been there and also having recently reread the minutes, there was concern that a conservation easement program would kind of eat away at the power of the landmark program, especially because the grant amounts were very similar. So I know for all of you who have no idea what's going on, this is a little confusing, and I really apologize. I'm happy to talk afterwards or at a different time if you'd like. But basically, conservation easement would allow less of the property to be protected. Like in this case, the front 10 feet was what's proposed and what was actually approved. That's the only part that was protected. And then the grant amount that was attached to that was $30,000. When you look at that in comparison to $40,000 for a whole property, that's where the discussion with HPC was, maybe we want to have a larger conversation, let's put it that way, about whether that's something that we want to pursue. However, that conservation easement for 601 Lincoln and the buy of 30,000 was approved by HPC. The applicant did not pursue getting it to city council. I was not involved. I do not fully know why. That's what happened. We don't have any requirements between HPC or Planning Commission and City Council. We don't have like any sunsets, right? So now it's going before council tomorrow. I'm presenting it. Staff is not making a recommendation, given A, the fact that it's been nearly 3 years since this project started, and B, because the conservation easement resolution update is no longer something that we're proposing or pursuing. It's also not something that HPC wanted to see at the time. So we're not making a recommendation. We're just bringing forward HPC's finding that the $30,000 and the 10-foot conservation easement is supportable, and that's what's going before council tomorrow night. So I know that was a wild trip, and again, happy to talk more, but yes.
Are you saying you're recommending against it
We're
tomorrow?
not making a recommendation. And you can read it in the council packet.
Oh,
I'm
I
happy
see.
to give, I'm
Okay.
happy to talk about that, or you can just read it, but it's just basically the facts that HPC approved it.
Yeah.
We're bringing it forward to council to finish the process.
The reason I brought it up, because this happened, I think it was in 2020, not 2021, but it was submitted as a landmarking, withdrawn, submitted as a conservation request easement, and that was sort of withdrawn, and then this is because of the size of the structure, it didn't fit, and then the language was wrong as drawn up by the city attorney, and I brought that up, but then when it was dropped anyway, I said, well, I won't pursue that. But if it's being brought up tomorrow, the language needs to be changed in the ordinance, and I can talk to you
Yep.
specifically about that.
You and I talk about that separately, but I would like to hear more.
Remember all that, Linda?
Yes.
It was, it was,
All right.
came up quickly.
Yes, it did. It did come up quickly. I've been working on it for months. But yes, it did come up quickly in a different sense. So any questions about that? I know, okay, probably not something we're going to see again, frankly. Sort of an artifact of a different time. But, well, it is what it is. But anyway, okay, that's it.
That's a good synopsis. All right. So any updates from commission members? So you said you would like to wait for the new construction conversation until our retreat. Is that what you said?
Yeah, I would
Okay.
prefer that, just because it was brought up potentially for me to bring it forward for you in November. And first of all, I don't think that's going to give me enough time. And second of all, I do think that it relates to
Everything else.
everything else.
Yeah.
You know.
And I think 2 months in the time period of construction is probably a pretty quick turnaround, don't you think?
Sure.
So, well, that should be, yeah, give us good direction and good discussion, because I think it is something we want to take our time with and really do it well. All right. You have a motion to adjourn?
Make a motion to adjourn.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
You wouldn't feel bad. No, I was hot in hell.
I was like, I should not be worried about it. I should have